Hello, gentlemen. How is everybody today? It's going to be a slightly different stream from what I originally intended, because I've had an interesting time in the last 24 hours or so. Where on earth is my own audio coming from? Why on earth do I always forget that? I always do the same thing, and it's such a silly thing to do. I always, when I'm posting links into Twitter or onto the forum, what I do is I open a tab of my own stream so that I can copy the link, and then I always forget to close the link before the actual thing starts. So that was very clever of me. I do apologize. Hopefully everything is working at the moment. Where was I? Ah, yes. I'm trying out some new stuff. Hello, Aldebaran. Nice to see you. I'm trying out some new stuff today, because you might be able to hear this. The BGM in the background. It's just a random thing that I found that I quite like the sound of. And feel free to tell me if you don't like it, because there's literally hundreds of thousands out there that I could be using. Podrix has correctly joined the channel. I keep meaning to turn that stupid thing off because I never use it, but hey, it's still a thing that's there. And currently, it's full moon. Just informing you, Kirsche will never date a college-educated man. I've never heard her say that. I've never heard Kirsche say that. But we're off to a great start already. Taiping was high AF. That is a name, okay? Taiping was high AF. Would you like to tell the class what exactly led you to creating a Google account with that name? Because I'm just not sure. The idea of an entire city being high is one of those things that sounds like a really strange phenomenon to have, like maybe in a superhero RPG. Kirsche wants a manly tradesman. I mean, I'm a gardener, so, well, I'm becoming a gardener. And I'm also studying 3D printing at the moment too. So it's not as if I'm not good with my hands, put it that way, and I am rapidly getting better in all aspects of using my hands. Well, not all aspects, but you know, whether I get better in that particular aspect depends an awful lot on her. And besides, you can go to college to study physical trades too. What are you talking about? There's things like physical colleges as well. Taipei or Oh, I read it as Taipei. Sorry, Proctor, academia is broken, self-education is enlightened, also Proctor, yum, 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 American education. Okay, let me just make it very clear. I don't think that college is useless in any capacity. There are some things, and the thing is, what you have to understand about the modern lifestyle is not that the education institutions are all useless. Most of the education institutions are all useless. The problem is that for the upper 20% or so in society, there have never been more opportunities than they have today. If you are born into the upper 20% or so of society, you are able to avail yourself of a level of education that nobody has ever had in their entire lives before. If you are born in the low 80%, then it is highly likely you are going to be exploited by your education system. Because from the very start, you are not going to have the same opportunities as the upper 20%. You are going to be put in a school system that is designed to turn you into an industrial socialist worker, and you are not going to be prepared for an actual independent lifestyle in any capacity. However, world-class education is actually still fully available for those who can get it. And also, I apologize if you can hear this very stupid dog barking in the background. They aren't useless, but a fair bit of degrees are. Yes, they are. Oh, absolutely. You know how police sometimes burn whole plots of weed? Well, imagine the wind changes direction. I like that. But yeah, if anybody doesn't like this BGM, then feel free to tell me and I won't bring it on again, but I quite like it for the vibe. I'm trying this I'm trying to, because I'm listening to it myself right now, and I'm trying to deliberately modulate my my voice to correspond with this kind of mood and atmosphere, because I can get quite passionate about these kind of topics, especially the topic that we're going to talk about today. But I don't want to come across as like a screaming nutter. I don't want to be somebody who is tuned into so that people that already believe what I'm going to say can get self-affirmation. No, I really do want to educate people. And in fact, education is something that I am extremely passionate about. Sure, if you're upper class or bougie enough to afford the good education, yeah, but no, I actually would push back on that a tiny bit. I don't think it's about affording a good education. Now, trust me, if you pay a lot of money for the right kind of education, you are most certainly going to be incredibly advantaged. It's not too audible anyway. Okay, I'll just turn it up a tiny bit. 1 second. There we go. I've just boosted it up around 15-20%. Again, this is the first time I've ever had a BGM or anything, so you are very much my guinea pigs for deciding if it's there. It might be more like 90/10. When people give statistics about all this stuff, I tend to be slightly suspicious of the raw statistics. I don't want there to be... I think that it's more than 10% overall. I would say maybe 15 to 20%. Because, and that might change. I think that it will decrease as time goes by. I don't think that it is increasing. Also, hello, Big Whale. Is it Big Whale or Big Wheel? Oh, I was studying the typing revolution when I created this account. It was so dumb that I decided to go with it. Most higher-end 3D print guys are also machinist-trained, IRIC, yes. Grant is your furry test subject, leave us out of it. Oh, you've no idea. You've no idea what I make that dog do behind the scenes. Yes. Trust me. You might call him a dog. I call him something else entirely. Oh, yes. But let's not get too far into that. Not tonight, not tonight. There are actually a couple of articles that I would like to discuss as well before we get into the main subject, because I didn't stream on Monday because it's full moon at the moment, and I don't know if... I'm sure there's plenty of other autistic people in my chat. Do you get affected by the full moon? When the full moon comes over the horizon, do you feel different? Because I certainly do. I most definitely do. Yesterday, without even knowing it was full moon, and the thing is, a lot of scientists, a lot of biologists, and a lot of doctors will say it's just confirmation bias. Like, you know, if you know what the phase of the moon is in advance, and you think that you're affected by the full moon, then the moon is going to be a placebo effect for you. All that's going to happen is that you act up when it's full moon, and you justify that you're acting up because it's full moon. But I deliberately don't memorize the phases of the moon. And yet, even though I don't know what phase of the moon it is, I still get lunar madness. And this was my problem yesterday. That I was sitting here, and I spent over an hour trying to find something that I wanted to talk about on Wednesday. I thought about talking about random articles. I thought about talking about the Niji-Sanji stuff that's going on. I thought about talking about indie drama. And I just felt, no, I didn't like it at all. The more PhDs and doctors talk on news programs, the more I think they should not talk. The kind of PhD holders that are, I won't say real PhD holders, but I will say more sincere PhD holders, more dedicated PhD holders. Those kind don't talk on the news. It's quite interesting. I don't know how many of you watch Charlotte Van Helen, who has been kind of a person who I've tried to render assistance to recently because she has had a very, very, very difficult life in general. But she was talking. She's Chinese. She's a Chinese girl, and her parents wanted her to be a doctor because that's what Chinese parents want from all of their children. And she instead decided to go art. She does very, very good art. Extremely good art. And I really like her art style. But she was talking about how she's currently in London and she's studying at an art college. I'm not sure if obviously it's not an all Chinese college or anything like that, but I think that there is a fairly high proportion of Chinese art students at this college. And she was talking about how she knows multiple Chinese people in her classes who actually don't do any art whatsoever. Instead, they are the children of Chinese millionaires, and they get sent to design schools in England or the West. And then, out of their allowance, they will simply pay other students to do their entire art portfolios. And then they will go home, and they will get some management job at a design company that never requires them to do any actual art or anything like that. So these people are quite literally useless, and I can really sympathize with her. I can understand why she gets very cross and angry at being surrounded by a lot of people that don't put any of the kind of work that she does into things. We have a lot of them in Australia as well. Yes, they are unfortunately quite common, and I find that very sad, and it is definitely an indictment against the college system. Standard for CCP trust fund kids, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that I don't know for certain if Charlotte was. She talks positively about Hong Kong a lot, but I don't think she's a Hong Kong nationalist or anything, because she doesn't really care for politics very much. And I don't want to put words into her mouth, but she definitely said in her stream, was it yesterday or the day before? I'm getting confused. Again, lunar madness. My perceptions of time and space are not too brilliant at the moment. But she did say that some of the nicest parts of China were still to be found in Hong Kong, and I do agree with her. There was a lot of Hong Kong people seeking refuge after the whole handover thing that came to places like Ireland and England, and they were pretty universally praised for their work ethic and their dedication. And it's very sad how, well, we see the impact of communism on Chinese society, and how it turned a very, well, I won't say vibrant culture necessarily, because Chinese before the CCP were incredibly poor, and, there was the whole century of humiliation, so they never really had the wealth to be a truly vibrant culture, but the culture they did have was I would say, pretty good overall. They talk about going to war with us, but Z's extended family lives here. Yeah, I really don't think that... I really don't think that China is going to go to war with the West anytime soon. It might go to war over Taiwan. I can't be as certain there. Because, I don't know, if I was Chinese and I looked at, say, Ukraine, and I saw how carefully, because there have been multiple instances of where NATO Article 5 could have been very, very much enacted. And NATO Article 5, for those who don't know, is basically if there is an attack on any member of NATO, then it is considered a declaration of war against all NATO countries. There have been multiple cases where Russia has accidentally or possibly deliberately fired munitions into NATO countries during its war with Ukraine. But every single time, NATO has backed off and they said, no, we don't want to become involved in this. And it's like that. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't want there to be a war in Europe, and I don't think that Ukraine is worth starting World War III over. But at the same time, the fact remains, technically speaking, Article 5 should have been triggered. It should have, and the only reason it didn't was because the Europeans didn't want to start World War III. And hey, I prefer it that way. But I mean, if you look at that, and you look at Taiwan, and you go, Taiwan has multiple defense contracts with other nations. I think America guarantees Taiwan's independence. I'm not entirely certain, but I do know that America is very, very heavily involved in Taiwan. And I could understand if Z looked at Taiwan and went, they didn't care. They didn't respond when Russia attacked Ukraine. they gave it. I can expect that they'll send lots of equipment and resources to Taiwan if I invade, but will they actually start World War III over me invading Taiwan? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe not. Russia won't win against NATO. I don't think it will. All I know is that no matter who wins World War III, everybody in some way will lose World War III. So let's not put that to the test, okay? I'm not quite ready for that just yet. I've got a lot more shit posting on the internet to do first, alright? I've got children to have, and I would quite like to have them before World War III, thank you. I have a plane ticket to buy. I am desperately trying not to play with a very, very crinkly piece of label right now. You have no idea how hard it is to stop. Europe is a herd of cats, though. America is two bulldogs fighting over meat, but will stop to charge at any postman walking on their turf. I can't necessarily disagree. One second, I'm just going to adjust my microphone a little bit because my neck is slightly aching. There we go. That's a more comfortable position. Much more comfortable now. It's interesting that we just start talking about China anyway. Well, I suppose it kind of makes sense because you're predisposed to talk about China given the title of this video. Taiwan makes high-end computer chips. Taiwan has plainly said they will blow up their own chip plants. If we lose access to those chips, we are so badly screwed that everyone will blame China. I do agree. At the same time, honestly, given the way the internet is, given the way the digital revolution has gone, I honestly would not be all that upset if there was like a massive chip shortage in the world. I think it would actually be a benefit for people because it would force them to confront a reality where all this nonsense with things like smart homes and 24/7 internet monitoring of absolutely everything just would not be possible on an infrastructure level. Do you have any idea how I never thought that I would miss dial-up internet. But now that I think about it, dial-up internet was probably the best time of my entire life. Because it made me deeply cherish, the amount of time that I had on the internet. Because I had dial-up for 5 hours every day. And that was it. And obviously, when you have dial-up, you don't load things very fast. And your access to the internet is very, very limited. But I vividly remember pretty much every single thing that I ever did on a dial-up internet. It won't be a shortage. It will end several technology trees. No one but Taiwan makes those chips. I know, and, well, almost like centralizing the manufacture of a valuable resource in one country is a bad idea or something. I agree. It's kind of like, hello, touch fluffy tail. Hello, Magdalena's Rex, by the way, as well as Arclight, Danny D, NeoRepo. Internet service will be shut down in a real war. Get into ham radio. I'm very glad that I've been able to make a lot more connections with people in real life in the last 6 months or so. I'm very glad to be able to... well, I mean, I've always had good connections because I've been part of a church for 30 years of my life, literally. But now that I'm branching out a little bit and I'm making contacts with my course for 3D printing and also with just the people that I'm working with in like my local men's club where I do gardening and I get to chat with cool old people about stuff. It puts things into perspective a great deal. There have been attempts to buy TSMC to start production in the US, but it's been rocky. Yeah, I think that it's because, as far as I'm aware, to create high-end computer chips, you need absolutely sterile conditions. And I mean sterile as in a single nanoparticle of dust will ruin an entire assembly line of millions of dollars worth of chips and tens of millions of dollars worth of man-hours of work. So, in order to start up a new chip refinery plant, they have to do something absolutely insane, like sterilize a room thousands and thousands of times in a row, reduce it to a vacuum, and to make sure it is as close to totally and utterly free of contaminants as possible, and that process takes years and years and years. So like 3 or 4 years in a row they have to sterilize these environments, because again, if there's even the smallest microparticle of dust, then the costs are just insane. And obviously the costs of creating that sterile environment and all of those decontamination protocols as well, because a lot of the chip manufacturing requires hand labor. It has to be done by hand in a lot of cases. And can you imagine being in like a clean suit, in a fully enclosed, basically you're inside a rubber spacesuit the entire time you're there? Yeah, good luck getting south of the border immigrant workers up to that standard. Yeah, I mean, false, you need tiny dexterous Asian fingers, that's why America's struggling to get started. I mean, yeah, that's true as well. I mean, it's not false, but it's definitely, I was going to bring that up, that definitely. The Asians just naturally have an advantage there. And I don't think that, there's this whole nonsense, oh, it's racist. It's racist to say that Asians are mostly doctors and they're mostly like engineers and so on. It's racist. No, it's nonsense. I'm sorry, the Asians literally have biological advantages in that area. They have small, delicate, dexterous fingers. They have incredible mental powers of memory retention and so on. There are competitions for memory retention every year. Every single one of those memory competitions is won by the Chinese. And I mean, they're won by the Chinese in the same way that an American male bodybuilder would beat the world's strongest woman in a contest every single time. It's that excessive. Like, the Chinese biologically have just been trained and literally bred for the ability to retain information on levels that a Western person can't understand. It's a bit like how a lot of Muslims are able to recite the Quran completely from memory, word for word, and they have been able to perfectly preserve the contents of the Quran through oral tradition, word for word, down through generations and generations, simply because they have literally had that memory bred into them that a regular person can't understand. And it's funny because if you look at history, there are multiple examples of that. For example, the Englishman. A small example with, for example, the longbow, the English longbow. The English longbow is physiologically impossible for someone who is not of British descent to properly wield reliably. There are obviously some, but for the most part, because the English, and especially people like the Welsh, who used like the Welsh longbow, is where the longbow came from originally. The Welsh trained with the longbow as children. They started training as children, they grew up, and then they had children, and those children inherited those genetics that had been trained by their parents and their grandparents, to the point where the joke is, to train a good longbowman, you start with his great-grandfather, because it takes 4 or 5 generations of intentional, selective breeding for a person to inherit the genetics that develop the kind of shoulder muscles and forearm muscles that is necessary to be a proficient longbowman. There's a racist brain and brawn joke to make about Asians and blacks around here somewhere. Ethic and phenotype traits, it's not racist, it's biology and genetics. Yeah. The Greeks did it with the Iliad, the Jews did it with the Torah, times have just changed, it wasn't necessary anymore. I mean, I'm not saying that it's that unique. I do think that I think the evidence suggests that human genetics are actually remarkably flexible, and that when you start specifically breeding or pushing for certain traits within a population group, those traits can actually emerge remarkably fast. For example, I'm pretty sure that if we started doing the same kind of eugenics programs the Chinese unambiguously did during the Communist Revolution, we would very quickly start to be able to engineer people of certain specific castes and ability sets. It's just like how, wasn't it? It was Brave New World. It was Adolphus Huxley's Brave New World, which kind of said this, where he foresaw that kind of future, where people were quite literally engineered, and not engineered through advanced genetic manipulation, but simply through literal birth vats, where they were exposed to certain stimuli. where people, as from the time they were embryonic cells, they were trained by their environment inside of their test tubes to develop certain habits, certain biological traits. And that was basically grounded in the science of the day. That was what was believed that could happen. There's a whole discussion on the collective unconscious to be had here. It's pretty fascinating. I mean, put it this way, I have sincerely thought about studying psychology in college before, but given the way that psychology is, I just kind of don't like it. Torah was written oral and they were extremely I said that it was the Quran. I said I didn't say the Torah. The Torah was written, yes. Trust me, I know plenty about that. It was the Quran that Muslim children are taught to be able to repeat from memory, and they can. I've literally met Muslims that can recite the Quran from memory who were 13 years old. They can recite something like 3/4 of the Quran from memory by the age of 14 or 15. And Caucasians didn't dominate everyone, only certain groups of Caucasians did. The rest was subjugated just like everyone else. Yep. I wanted to make it simple. Let's say Asians are smarter and blacks are more physically able. Does mixing them literally just add from both? It's a funny thought. Now, there have actually been studies. There's actually a book called The Bell Curve, which studies this. And unfortunately, it's really not that simple. Like, genetics are not Lego. Genetics are not Lego. You can't just put a strong man and an intelligent woman together and expect a strong and intelligent child, or even on average for their children to be strong and intelligent, because genetics are just a little bit more complicated than that. But what does happen is that people self-select. What the Bell Curve said, the Bell Curve is a book that has been accused of being a racist eugenics screed by idiots and morons, but it's not. I've read the Bell Curve. It's a very, very good book, and I strongly recommend the Bell Curve. And one of the main takeaways from the Bell Curve is the point that when you create societal incentives towards that encourage people to demonstrate certain traits when they select partners and when they breed, then those traits will become dominant within certain economic groups. And one of the examples, or two main examples, is the fact that, for starters, what very often happened under nobility is that the ancient nobility of Europe and other places would breed via family lines to keep their titles or keep money within the family. And very often, great noble houses were founded by people of exceptional mental ability or even physical ability. So you would have a genius-level patriarch who started a great noble house. But the problem is that even if his wife was also a genius, then there's an effect called reversion to the mean, which basically means if you take two people that have, say, 140 IQ, and they breed and they have 3 or 4 children, then on average, those children will have lower IQ than their parents. Not by much, not by a huge amount. And those children will then go on to have children of themselves, and then the whole new generation will have maybe 1 or 2 lower IQ points themselves. Maybe one of them will have far lower IQ, and maybe that child will go on to have more children than the rest of the family line. And so slowly over time, and the larger the pool gets, the lower the average intelligence becomes. And there's been theories that this is actually what caused the collapse of the noble system and of the monarchic patriarchal system of Europe in the late 19th and 20th centuries. There's often this argument that around the time of Bismarck and the German Empire was really the last maybe 1 or 2 generations of the great German intellect, where you had very strong family lines that had extremely intelligent and capable patriarchs that then created a generation or 2 or 3 generations of incredibly capable leaders. But by the time of World War I, enough generations had passed that the Kaiser's family, the noble families of Germany, had experienced reversion to the mean, and it had happened all across Europe. That empires that had been built by tremendously intelligent and capable people. For example, Peter the Great, and of course the European monarchs. Shirt sleeves in 3 generations, pretty much, yeah. That all of these monarchs, it's a very common analysis of World War One, that the monarchs that were fighting World War One, for example, the Kaiser of Germany, the Emperor, the Tsar of Russia, and in some, not so much because Britain was a parliamentary system, and of course France had its glorious republics and everything, which worked out very, very well for them. But all of these men were very much living in the shadow of greater ancestors. The Tsar of Russia was one in particular, is that he wasn't a bad person. He really was. I think was it Tsar Nicholas II? I do apologize. I remember these people as figures, but their names are a lot harder for me to remember. I think it was Tsar Nicholas II. Is that he was known for being a generally good person who tried very hard to be a good ruler, but he simply did not have the intelligence of his forebearers. And it was the same with Kaiser Wilhelm, is that he tried very hard to be a great ruler, but he was just, again, not as intelligent as his forebearers. And these people, because they were handed positions of great power that they were not mentally capable of, basically tore the world apart with their violence and their inability to manage things correctly. Even if I prefer monarchy over democracy, a pure hereditary monarchy doesn't end well. I'd rather a more self-aware version of the 2nd century Roman Empire where the monarchy adopts successors. I mean, that did work for a bit. I mean, again, there were major problems with that, and you can argue back and forth over all different kinds of lineages and ways of rulership, but let's just go back to the bell curve just for a little bit, is that one of the major points of the bell curve was that under the kind of meritocratic society that that we live in the West overall, or we used to, the top people, the most intelligent people in society, are taken to colleges where, under optimal conditions, they associate with people of a similar level of intelligence that are not their direct relatives. And so let's say you have a college campus of 2,000 or 3,000 people. Those 2,000 or 3,000 people can be, say, the top 20% in terms of IQ. And those people will be able to interact and pair up in that environment with a much larger genetic pool than their parents or their forebearers would within the nobility. And so you can have 2 people of very high intelligence who can then breed together, and they will produce children that might suffer some level of reversion to the mean, but then those people will probably get sent to the same kind of college that their parents did. And again, because that college will have several thousand people of roughly equal levels of intelligence, then the genetic diversity and the selectiveness of that system will enable people to actually produce children that are either as intelligent as they are or even slightly more intelligent, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a kind of natural eugenics and natural self-selection, which is overall good because everybody wants a partner who they think will produce strong and healthy children that are at least their own equals, if not better. That's a natural urge. And the trouble is, of course, look at the other end of the spectrum. You have, for example, ghetto culture, where people are working to an entirely different set of incentives. And look at the average, say, ghetto family. It's one parent families. Something like 70 to 80% of all ghetto families have only one parent. It's almost overwhelmingly a female parent. And if you run that cycle long enough, then you start to see very disturbing genetic implications as well. Because reversion to the mean in those circumstances will be very high. That people of low intelligence will also tend to be much more promiscuous. This is also a major problem in various African societies as well, especially places like Ethiopia and Eritrea, is that communities are very, very promiscuous. But they also tend to be not particularly high intelligence. That's why if you look at IQ quotients from places like Africa and Ethiopia, etc., is the average general IQ is far lower than it is in the West. And that's not because these people are stupider on the genetic level. It is simply because their society and their circumstances, and again, according to the bell curve, I don't necessarily subscribe to this myself, but this is an argument that the bell curve makes, is that according to the needs and the incentives of their society, is that they simply do not breed with intelligence in mind. They breed with the idea that was exactly the same as, say, you would have in Europe several hundred years ago. Is that in Europe several hundred years ago, the average family would have 9 even more children, because the expectation was that 7 or 8 of those children would die before they reached adulthood. And it's the same in today in these other countries. Is the expectation is that the vast majority of children will not reach adulthood. So the incentive for those who want to breed is not to carefully select one partner of high compatibility and high intelligence. It's to have as many children as possible on the hopes that 1 or 2 will survive to adulthood. Intelligence does not necessarily translate to survival. Proctor wants a royal academy from a villainous isekai to exist IRL. I mean, I think that opportunity should be open to everybody. Again, this is... Why is that dog not shut up? Ugh. There's a pair of birds screaming outside as well. I'm not sure why. There might be a fox around already, which would be very irritating. These third world countries should fix their medical infrastructure and also pass heavy adultery laws. Plus, a lower life expectancy incentivizes having children regardless of intelligence. It's yet to be proved that intelligence is a naturally selected for trait. Depending on the environment, high intelligence can be nothing but a burden. I mean, yeah, Maniacal Foreigner. That basically sums up what I've been trying to say, is that humans, because of progress in Western countries, have been able to create environments where intelligence that is not naturally selected for as a trait is selected for as a trait, as a favorable trait. The intelligence is hard, nearly impossible to define, let alone measure. I would completely disagree. I'd completely disagree. There has been very, very heavy studies on intelligence, and there's a lot of pushback on the idea that IQ quotient or intelligence quotients are like biased or inaccurate, whereas there's practically no hard data to support the idea that good IQ tests are incapable of determining people's capabilities. In fact, some of the strongest data points are from the army, because obviously the military has a very, very, very strong incentive to encourage people to be intelligent. Because intelligence is not just a measurement of your ability to think. It also governs things like reaction times, problem-solving ability, ability to work within a team, empathy, etc. And ironically, even empathy is a trait that is very useful for a soldier, because the best soldiers are not cold-blooded psychopaths. The best soldiers are consistently those with high empathy, because empathy is a performance enhancer. Because empathy causes people to push themselves harder for the sake of saving their fellow man. And it has been proven time and time again that those people that make the best soldiers are not remorseless psychopaths who can like pull a trigger and just kill a person without thinking about it. No, they are people that form very strong, close emotional bonds with other soldiers and are driven to push themselves on the battlefield to save the lives of their comrades in the face of enemy attack. And so the military, and again, think about the CIA, it has mostly been the CIA that has conducted so much research into psychology and brainwashing, but they've also conducted many, many, many tests into seeing whether intelligence can be raised or even lowered in some cases. And pretty much the conclusion is that a person's intelligence is essentially, it's like a container that everything else in their personality can be poured into. That when you encourage somebody to seek education, they are filling up that container more completely, but you can't overfill it. Everything just spills out over the edge. And if you have a small container, aka you have a low IQ, you can't use education or any real external method to increase that low IQ. It's not that we do not have any understanding of intelligence, but consensus on intelligence is too often seen as absolute. It can go that way. I don't deny that. I think that I do definitely agree that people are overly judgmental. IQ, just because somebody has a low IQ does not mean they are a useless person. Absolutely not. You'd know all that if you analyzed old myths closely. They deal heavily in human nature, especially during wartime. Yeah, I agree. Like, just look at pretty much all ancient myths and legends, things like the Norse myths, the Greek myths, etc. In fact, it's a very strong theme that runs through all of these old stories, is that the monsters that are defeated and destroyed are the ones that are evil, that go out of their way to practice the worst aspects that exemplify the worst aspects of human violence, whereas the great heroes are almost always seen as embodiments of some positive aspect of the human psyche. And sometimes, like with the case of the Greeks and so on, that heroes get laid low because of their human weaknesses. Hello, Proctor. Hello, Dabbing Taco. Nice to see you. I think it's a fascinating thing to think about. And I think it's also funny. I remember reading a study once. There was a test done where two groups of people were taken. And they had all these tests done. Both groups had the same tests. They had IQ tests. They had genetic tests. Basically, the aim was to find out as much as possible about these people's intrinsic potential. So how high their IQs were, what their genetics said about their potential for athleticism and reflexes, all this kind of stuff. And then what the researchers did was they told one group the results. They told one group the results of these tests. Like, they said to one group, look, you have this level of potential in sport, you have this level of potential in academics, etc. And they were reasonably certain that these tests were accurate, mind you. So they weren't trying to fool them. They said to people, frankly, our tests indicate that you have this level of aptitude in this skill, or you have this lack of aptitude in that skill. And then they basically let both groups, because one group they told, the other group they didn't. Or in fact, they might have told the other group the opposite. They might have lied to the other group. I forget precisely. And then they sent these groups on their way. And then later on, they just checked up on the progress of these two groups. And they found that overall, the people that they had told had high potential were underachieving. They found that people who were told from the offset that they had high potential in life tended to view that as a burden, whereas those who either did not know about their potential or had been deliberately told they had low potential were more motivated to achieve things in spite of their perceived disabilities or lack of exceptionalism. And I find that a very, very interesting conclusion, because I understand that very much, because like I have a mix of both. I have a disability in that I have autism and I have ADHD. But I also test very high on IQ tests. I think the lowest I've ever scored on an IQ test is something like 125. When I was like 10 or 12, I was regularly testing above 130 on IQ tests. And I often wish I didn't know what my IQ potential was, because it means that whenever I struggle with something, I feel a lot more resentment against myself, because I feel as if I should be better than I am. And I feel as if I'm letting myself down when I don't do my best. I'm not going to say, oh no, my disability is that my IQ is too high. No, it's not that stupid. No, I'm trying to get across something different. Believing those labels isn't healthy. Yeah, I agree. I prefer not to think of myself in terms of, oh, my IQ is really high, therefore I can do this, or oh, I have this disability, therefore I can't do that. theoretical intelligence versus applied intelligence, yeah, that is a factor too. That is a factor too. But I can definitely empathize with that thing from that study. My main weakness is that I just care too much. I do care too much. I care far too much. It's kind of quite funny. Like, before I started socializing a lot more, I kind of worried that I had low levels of empathy, because I would hear things on the radio. For example, my mother is a very emotional... Well, she's not an emotional person, but she's a very caring person. My mother is a very, very, very caring person. And when she hears bad things on the radio, she gets very emotionally upset about them, whereas I am a lot more clinical and uncaring. For example, when I hear about disasters, when I hear dreadful stories about people getting killed or mutilated, or actually, mostly if it's people who get killed, I have a very, very kind of they're dead, they don't care attitude towards suffering that ends lives, put it that way. I sympathize, obviously, with the misery and distress of those who have lost loved ones, and I'll certainly experience that when my parents do die. But I always worried to myself, you know, do I actually have a good amount of empathy, given how I react to an awful lot of things that I hear about, that I see people around me being emotionally affected by a lot worse? But I think I've actually found my niche, because it's like with Charlotte a few days ago, with Charlotte Van Helen. Like, she went through a really tough time. A very, very tough time, because, she, as I said, she's studying at college. Have a sip of water, 1 second. There we go. She's studying at college, and basically, her living situation got messed up quite badly. I won't go into details, because she didn't go into too many details on her stream, so I won't talk about it in too much detail. I wouldn't talk about it at all, but she did talk about it on stream, and so I feel safe for, like, repeating it. She was saying how basically there was a chance that she would have to go back to Canada, and she was very, very upset about that, because she wouldn't have been able to take any of her drawing materials or anything like that with her, and drawing is her life, basically. And I felt an extremely... I literally, to, like, that joke, I can fix her, bros. I can fix her, bros. I just said to her, you know, if there's anything that I can do, I really want to help. I thought to myself, I spent quite a few hours just thinking, is there anything that I can do to help her? I said, you know, if you need somewhere to go, then I've got plenty of relatives in England that can possibly help you out with that. Just let me know. And it's the same with Kirsha, too. It's the same with Kirsha, is that I listen to her talk about the dreadful things that have happened to her in her life, and that is when I feel a great deal of emotion. When I feel... And I hate injustice, because I feel injustice is what causes my emotional response, far more than chance and circumstance. If thousands of people are killed in, say, a storm, then I feel that's dreadful, but at the same time, what is my emotion going to do in that circumstance? How is me shedding tears for these dead people going to help them? How is it going to help their families? Whereas, when I hear a case of severe injustice in the world, then I feel I should, emotionally, I feel as if there is a twinning of my emotional side and my practical side, where I think to myself, I feel very strongly motivated to help these people, because I feel as if this is something where my actions could be augmented by my emotions to be more than just, oh, you need help? Yeah, here's some help. No, because a lot of people end up fixing themselves in a lot of ways, very often. But if they don't have the idea of support behind them, then they're just gonna crash. They're just gonna be miserable. Excuse me a second, I've got a bunch of pings on Discord. Give me 1 second to glance across at them. No, it's just somebody there. Nothing particularly interesting. Let me just look back at chat for a second, because a lot of people have been talking. The attitude the Greeks had towards their heroes could be used today, the capacity to appreciate someone for their accomplishments despite their personality flaws. Yep, yep. So we need to call people the R word to make them realize their full potential. I really don't find the word retard to be offensive in any capacity. I mean, retard is literally just means a delayed reaction. I use retarder in my paints, so sorry. I think that calling retard a slur is absurd. It's literally a psychological term, and the only reason that it stopped being a psychological term that was never even used offensively. If you go back and you listen to psychologists who use the term retard, they're not saying, "Ugh, this person is retarded." No, they're saying that this person, it was actually, retard used to be a positive term, because, again, you have to understand what words mean. Retard meant delayed reaction, as in, a retarded person was somebody who was implied to have normal development but had not reached that level of development yet. They were retarded in their personal development. Whereas you could much more argue that stupid or idiot is a slur, because those cap somebody's potential. It stopped being a psychological term because of COD lobbies, guys. Yeah, again, I don't consider calling somebody a retard to be an insult in any real way. I mean, it is an insult. Like, if I said, "Oh, you're a retard," and it's obvious that I intend it as an insult, but at the same way, I say that because I feel that it's just not a particularly strong one. It's not like saying, "Oh, I hope you die," or something stupid like that. Retard is going through the queer effect. Everyone said queer, then suddenly it was N-word tier to say queer. Now queer is part of the LGBTQ rainbow. Exactly. 2 words, euphemism, treadmill. Yeah, and I don't subscribe to it at all. Does anyone get upset about idiot, moron, or imbecile, the terms that mentally retarded eventually replaced, as each of the prior ones had replaced the others in turn? Yeah, it's completely absurd to me. I don't see the point. I don't see the point. Give me a moment, please. Oh, that's annoying. I feel I've heard a great statement lately. Philosophy is applied autism. I'd agree. This is why there are supplementary measurements like 2 IQ, like EQ and AQ, in order to get a better picture at someone's practical intelligence rather than their theoretical potential. Oh, what? Sorry, the chat just did a stupid thing. I lost my place. I seemingly don't care about most things for some reason, like I logically get how horrible something can be, but I struggle to actually emotionally understand the pain behind it. Aren't you a woman, Jackie? Didn't you say that you were a woman on Discord? I do apologize if I got that wrong or you were joking, because in my experience, women tend to have much higher emotional... Oops, and I dropped something, that was clever. Women tend to have higher emotional intelligence than men, and men tend to be much more practical overall when it comes to solving problems than women. Women will solve problems with the idea of they want people's feelings to be assuaged, whereas men are just like, I don't care about your feelings, but I will solve this problem in a practical way. And I definitely think that the benefit of being raised principally by a woman while being a man has been that I've gotten the benefit of both, really. I like to solve people's problems in a way that is not just practical, but also suits their emotional needs. It'd be funnier if I sold that lie, but no, I'm male. Okay, alright, okay. I distinctly remember you saying you were a woman. Maybe it's just my brainworms, maybe I'm just insane. Clearly the PC term is person. Are you a woman, Proctor, assuming someone's gender? I mean, I have lived long enough on the internet. Like, I literally used to roleplay female characters all the time. I mean, not in sexual scenarios, but you know, I would play them in like D&D campaigns. And back then, when VC, when I was a lot younger and internet speeds were a lot slower, it wasn't normal for people to use VC all the time. And so a person could go into a Discord server, have a female avatar, and play a female character in a roleplay. Well, not Discord. This was before Discord, and be like, and people would just naturally, they wouldn't think that they were a woman, but they would just naturally be like, yeah, this person is playing a woman, and I see no reason to question about it. Birds and women aren't real, obviously. My birds are very real, and they are very cute. I love my birds. TeamSpeak or IRC, that's possible. Alexithema is highly prevalent among individuals with autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, ranging from 50% 85%. What even is alexithymia? Allow me to look that up. Give me a moment. I've literally never heard of alexithymia, so one moment, please. Alexithymia. A term to describe problems with feeling emotions. In Greek, it loosely translates to no words for emotion. It is estimated that 1 in 10 people has alexithymia, but it is much more common in those with depression and in autistic people. 1 in 5 autistic people have alexithymia. Interesting. I've never heard that term before. Individuals with alexithymia may struggle to label and recognize their own emotional experiences. I definitely don't have alexithymia. I'm very, very conscious. I am very, very conscious of my emotions. It's not that I don't have, it's not that I am unconscious of my emotions, it's just that I tend not to, I tend not to experience the same kind of emotions in response to certain stimuli as regular people. No, I have completely skipped out on the problem. I understand my own feelings very well. That's the problem. I know exactly what I am thinking and exactly how I am feeling. And then I look at how other people are reacting to things, and I think, there's just a complete break there. I am not feeling the same thing as the other people. It's not like a case of, oh, I am, but in a different way. No, I literally don't feel the same thing. Can you visualize an apple in your head? I'm a creative person. I literally draw, so of course I can visualize an apple in my head. One moment. I have a very visual memory. I think I have a very dynamic... Sorry, I'm just adjusting myself on my chair. There we go. Oh, I apologize. This chair is very squeaky. It also manifests as trouble understanding other people's emotions. I used to have trouble understanding other people's emotions, and then... I think this is a case where my intelligence... Yes, can you rotate it? I mean, yeah. I can. Inner monologue as well. I have a very, very strong inner monologue. I often talk to myself. And I don't mean like in a schizophrenic kind of way, but no, when I sit alone, I am not scared of sitting alone with myself. My greatest fear is not sitting alone in a room with just my own thoughts. No, absolutely not. In fact, I don't do that enough. I really don't sit alone with my thoughts enough. Because I have ADHD, so it's hard for me to put myself in a headspace where I'm just thinking for myself. I always want stimuli of some sort. Unfortunately, I've been able to try to focus on that as much. Sorry, what was I just saying? I'm sorry, my train of thought ran off a cliff right there. My biggest fear is sitting alone in a room with... Azahara, that's funny, that's funny. I don't think any of us would want to sit alone in a room with Nolan's thoughts. I wouldn't mind sitting alone in a room with Nolan, because then it would mean I would get to beat him up, because God knows he needs a good thrashing. That man needs to be beaten up, quite violently. I have a more verbal memory. When I hear someone speak, it's like I see a blackboard in my head that the words being written on. I can think like that. I generally hear words in my head. When I visualize an apple in my head, it's like a hyper-realistic apple you'd see in What do you... I don't watch SpongeBob, but isn't SpongeBob a cartoon? How could it be a hyper-realistic apple in SpongeBob? Wouldn't a hyper-realistic apple in SpongeBob be a cartoon apple? I don't know. Oh, we're going places with this. We're going quite interesting places. Allow me to just consult the wonderful tabs and hope that my by moving this tab, it is not going to make everything else violently explode. And there was a couple of things that I wanted to discuss with people. One thing, actually two things. Two things are fairly involved with Vtuber stuff. I'm very glad that I didn't comment too much on the Niji-sanji stuff, because Niji-sanji, a few days ago, dropped a new generation on us, and, well, they didn't do it very well. Because, for starters, they announced the teaser for this new generation, but they used clip art to announce it. Their announcement for the new generation was literally just an image of cemetery gates from freepix.com for some strange reason. And I don't mean, with a stock image. Exactly, that damn gate. They used a stock asset of a cemetery gate, which is just, I mean, can you even? And the thing is, after that happened, the spice began to flow. Whoever made the Auschwitz comparison on the forum with the gay lesbian tears. I mean, Niji-sanji is at its best when it's just so easy to parody. Like, it just writes itself. All they did was put a filter over it and their logo on the gate. Yep. It was literally all they did. An intern probably made that in less than 5 minutes. It was just amazing. But that's not the thing, because they then released their initial teaser where the talent showed up and they said a few lines. And almost instantaneously, this great big narrative happened where one of the talents, whose name I don't even remember, was accused of being a former ASMR VTuber who had he wasn't a VTuber before then, sorry. A real, like, an ASMR YouTuber, not VTuber, just to be clear. I'm going to mix the two up, but just so we're clear, he was not a VTuber before this. He was a YouTuber. He was called Nighttime Audios, and people almost immediately assumed that because his voice matched very closely the voice lines from the trailer, that Nighttime Audios was the new VTuber for Niji-sanji's, was one of the VTubers for Niji-sanji's new ASMR generation. Because, you know, he's going to be a femboy, and he's going to, like, whisper into the microphone for desperate fujoshis, because that's all that Niji-sanji cares about nowadays. And this guy had been in a lot of controversy before. He was accused of scamming. He was accused of making very, basically, abuse ASMR, where he has, like, ASMR titles like Your Boyfriend pushes you against the wall, or grabs your hands, or has an argument with you stuff. I saw that on 4chan. Thing is, I want them to give a chance on their own merits, but they've got such limp concepts. Made Rich Brat Man. The man is, I mean, for Niji-sanji, given the track record of Niji-sanji men, just having a Niji-sanji man would be a stretch, would be something new. Personally, I think Niji has always been trashy, but now it's obvious since the clique and management's incompetence has blown up several times. Abusimar. Oh, that's really funny. Abusimar. And I thought to myself, I thought about talking about this on Monday. And I thought, no. Because I think this is blown up a bit too much. I made a video about, well, not a video, but I did a stream about how Niji-sanji, the rats are winning for Niji-sanji, but I don't think they should be. Because I think we've actually crossed the point where it's become trendy to hate Niji-sanji. And trust me, I hate Niji-sanji, because Niji-sanji is a terrible company. But people are so obsessed with hating Niji-sanji that they now go after everything that Niji-sanji does. And they scrutinize everything for the tiniest thing they can criticize. The moment people thought this Nighttime Studios guy was this new Niji-sanji hire, they began digging on him. and they accused him of all sorts of stuff, very incoherently. The accusations against him were pretty damn incoherent and stupid. There was some truth to them as far as I can tell, but not much. And now, he's come out with this... let me just get rid of that, that's not relevant until later. He's come out with this statement here, which says, from Nighttime Audios... I said Nighttime Studios before, I'm sorry. Let me just open that in a new tab, actually, so I can zoom in. There are a lot of speculations and rumors on me joining some VTuber community that took part in some unfortunate scams and other bad things, all because I sound like the newest member. These are false. Those who follow me know I have made some mistakes and got into some issues with some old followers who I unfortunately hurt. I am a human who makes mistakes, and I am both undeserving of this channel and the things I have. I am not a part of Niji or whatever it is called. I am appalled to have woken up by comments calling an assaulter, an abuser, and all these things this company has done. Below is a Twitter thread of literal proof that I am not who those say I am. I'm just a cringe ASMR YouTuber. I'm not a scummy VTuber. Below is also the threat I received by an old follower after I messaged them a full-on apology. I'm turning off comments to protect myself. I shouldn't receive the hate for other people's actions. Nighttime Audios is done. Stop lying to people just to get justice. Tourists or Twitter brain rot? Apparently the girlfriend of that Nighttime Studios guy posted on Twitter about the situation. He made a statement too. He is not the new Niji, apparently. This must be... Yeah, as Dabbing Taco just said, it was blown out of proportion just to hate on Niji Sanji, but as Dabbing Taco said, this must be a gay op. Dabbing Taco, can you explain a bit? When you say this must be a gay op, do you think that Nighttime Audios is the new VTuber and he's just covering for himself? Or do you think the whole... this guy is the new VTuber is Nighttime Audios, that was the gay op? I want clarity, because even though we'll know that on debut day if he is Nighttime Audio, at the end of these days these people are entertainers. Most of them are just there to make people laugh. I don't like most of them and I hate the company, but how people are handling Niji, and you're gonna post something more, okay? As, yeah, this is was this his girlfriend? Hello, my name is Sura. I'm a girlfriend of Nighttime Audios who had rumors about him about being a character on the Niji Sanji. Unfortunately, he's not the new VTuber on Niji Sanji. We got it, they sound alike, but you guys cannot accuse someone of being the new VTuber. Here is another evidence that I have for that Nick is not the VTuber y'all mentioned. These people have such atrocious grammar. We FaceTimed for 3 hours, almost never saw him opening his eyes. However, this VTuber posted a response 5 hours ago while he was sleeping. Is this enough or should I find more evidence? Why is he called Ryoma? That's really... because my favorite character in all of anime is Ryoma Nagare from Getter Robo. The fact this guy has the first name Ryoma depresses me a great deal. Ryan again pointed out this has been fervently latched onto by Niji's sister, so non-zero chance of it being a gay op, but also she apparently posted this as evidence. Yeah, this is what I don't really like. The fact that people have been saying, oh, this is a gay op. Ryoma what now? Is it Ryoma Nagare or is it Ryoma Nagare? I can't remember how to pronounce it exactly in Japanese. That's not evidence. Either way, Lars will be male on his debut day. Now there'll be eyes on his debut. I mean, to be fair, sounding somewhat similar is not evidence either. Really exposes an ugly side of the VTubing community, more so with how ugly Niji is themselves. The hyperfixation on every minor thing is just depressing. It's the same tier of stuff that Doki flipped for. I mean, even if he is, what does it matter? Let him do his job. Ryoma Nagare, I'm not saying the N-word, you idiots. 1 second, I'm going to adjust myself on my chair. I'm not going to subject you to more creaking. It's Japanese. Always assume it's pronounced phonetically. Nagari. Okay, Nagari. The passions are so high because the stakes are so low. Yeah, I mean... Be honest, who here seriously thinks that the new Niji Sanji generation will get more than maybe 300 or 400 CCV at most? And I don't want to... I'm just triggering people in chat right now because of my inability to pronounce foreign names correctly. I don't want to defend them because I fiercely hate Nietzsche's attitude and the things they've said. Maybe the maid will get high CCV. I mean, the maid is... I'm sorry, the whole... Oh, cute anime maid girl. Oh, that's been done to death, I'm afraid. About one Finana, just like the other way if you didn't even get a name. The common Anglo ailment. Yes, I am shameless in my refusal to pronounce other names properly. This was, again, it just irritates me. Another guy told he killed himself before joining, sufficient to say he lied about it. Funny how he is from the same company. Yeah, people are just going back and forth over this. I'm still not convinced it's 100% not him. Grow the F up, Lucas, because you're not a child anymore. Be mature, you're the job, and touch some grass to touching people from online. She also seems to be content in shitting on all his previous mods, detractors like this Vtuber person. I don't know the full extent of what he said, because he apparently went protected after being dogpiled by sisters. There's something quite strange in all of this, and it's a weird coincidence that when his girlfriend started being an attack dog, a lot of accusations are bull or irrelevant when his apology video was groveling, because he accepted money, and that's why he deleted all forms of donos like Throne. And as Rat says, none of the proof provided is proof of anything. I just don't like how people are so vitriolic at the moment. Did we find their actual PLs yet? Knowing Nietzsche, I would believe them not having any prior experience, though. I've heard absolutely nothing aside from this guy. I have no idea who they used to be. I don't really care all that much. The people that I know are not part of it, so I just don't care. I just don't care, guys. Just let Niji-Sanji die quietly. That's all that I ask for. Just let it die quietly, because it's a dying company. It's not going to be coming back anytime soon. Niji-Sanji is something or other. I can't think of a good argument. But anyway, I think I've waffled a little bit too much. Do we even have a reason to care? Exactly. I don't care, and I don't think you should either. You underestimate our autism as a VTuber gossip community forum. I mean, yeah, but the thing is, people hyper obsess over a bunch of silly stuff, and then they just ignore big things that happen as well. And if I post them on the forum, I get told, "Oh, why are you talking about this thing? Nobody cares about that." When it's literally the biggest thing that's going on in the VTuber sphere for weeks and weeks, and causes a whole lot of stuff. So I think that people are just really dumb sometimes to what things they hyper obsess over and what things they just arbitrarily decide to ignore. Ain't so much of a containment. It is, though. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that people should be, like, hunted just because they decide to join Niji-Sanji. Niji-Sanji's scandals seem to have died down. I hate drama in which everyone just got along. I wish people would get along, but then again, I wouldn't have a channel if people got along, so... Yeah, like, I've helped people cover up stuff that would make great content for the forum, because I'm like, I don't want to be, like, false ID and make a scandal out of everything. And people trust me because of that, and I really appreciate it when people trust me. When people will actually come to you and say, you know, I want to talk to you about this problem that I have, or this thing that is going on behind the scenes, because I trust that you are not going to instantly start streaming about it and saying, there are something or other in the VTuber community, and this person has accused that person. Having people's confidence is a very pleasant thing, and I hope that continues for as long as possible, because I want to be somebody that people can trust. A name you can trust in VTubing, because goddamn, there aren't many of those around. If everyone just forgets about a topic 6 months from now, then I have no reason to be invested right now. Yeah. Anyway, let me just go back to just chatting for a second. Because I'm pretty sure that, yes, unfortunately I need to reload this, because I have a highlighter app installed, which is very temperamental, and I just have to reload the book before I start it. It's just needing to prepare the PDF, and then we will actually get on to what we are supposed to be talking about tonight. Have I seriously been yapping for a whole... Are you joking? Are you seriously joking? Have I been yapping for a whole hour? I have been yapping for a whole hour. Are you kidding me? Are you Good grief, I've been yapping for a whole hour. I'm very sorry. I did not mean to yap for an hour and a half. Actually, I think it's been slightly longer. Maybe because I started the stream a little bit before. The next big thing is if Wuthering Waves is good. I have no idea what the hell even is Wuthering Waves. But anyway, I'm going to move on to what I wanted to talk about tonight, and it's this. Full moon, nothing but tangents. Nah, I want to focus on this. I want to focus on this because it's very, very interesting. Because this is my current favorite book in the entire world. Because I had not read this book until last night. I am now about 80 pages into this book. I've read 80 pages of this in less than 6 hours, and it's an amazing book. A really amazing book. I love it. Allow me to just, yeah. It's called, the book's title is Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a Study of Brainwashing in China. And this book was published in, I believe, the late 1960s. Let me just put that up there because I just want to make it very clear. If you want a copy of this book, don't ask me for a PDF on Discord. That would be wrong, and that would be piracy. Please don't ask me for books like this. You inspire my autism. Thank you. Wuthering Waves is the latest Chinese gacha slot. Jokes aside, your stance on everything is very respectable. When I get around to funding a model and stuff, I want to bring the same kind of trust to VTubing. I'm very glad that people feel that I'm up. It genuinely does. It genuinely does warm my heart when Charlotte yesterday. I haven't had a chance to. She turns off clips, so I wasn't able to clip it because I will admit I do sometimes clip things purely for my own ego. But yeah, Charlotte on her stream, Charlotte Van Helen. She specifically said that I'd been one of the people that really helped her when she had those issues. And that really, really made me feel good. And it wasn't like a massive ego boost, but I felt like, damn, I actually have tangible proof that I exerted myself for another person, and they're sincerely grateful for the effort I put in on their behalf. And that felt really, really good. Like, there's a scripture in the Bible, there is more happiness in giving than there is in receiving, and that's a very, very good scripture, and I think that it's something that I do try and live for. I try and give more than I take. Rob from your library like a normal member of a community. But going back to this book, I think it's very important to establish what we're actually talking about, and the highlighted sections are the ones that I will focus on most of all, because brainwashing is something that is used in general terms far too much in life, and as Christ be a top and give passages into John 4:33. Well, I'm definitely a top, so there's no danger of me being anything but that. But yes, we'll transition to slightly more serious subject matter now. When confronted with the endless discussion on the general subject of brainwashing, I am sometimes reminded of the Zen Buddhist maxim: the more we talk about it, the less we understand it. The confusion begins with the word itself, so new and yet already so much part of our everyday language. It was first used by an American journalist, Edward Hunter, as a translation of the colloquialism "see now," literally wash brain, which he quoted from Chinese informants who described its use following the communist takeover. So this is a relatively new term. And this, it says here, brainwashing soon developed a life of its own. It was quickly applied to Russian and Eastern European approaches, and then to just about anything that the communists did anywhere. And I dislike this. I think that in order to mount a defense against the kind of nonsense that happens in modern day society, you need to be very clear on the usage of words and their terminology. Because even if you are communicating with somebody who shares your mental attitude and your ideals at a very high level, if the two of you are using a terminology that you don't have a mutual understanding of, then you are both going to come away from that encounter with very different ideas of what you just talked about. And this is why I very often like to preface, why I talk a lot on Discord or my posts. I spend an awful lot of time explaining my usage of certain terms, and some people find it annoying, and I can understand that, because I talk a lot, as you may have guessed. But I think it is incredibly important that everyone in a movement, or even just a general, even an ideology or anything like that, understands the terminology that they're using. Because otherwise, for one thing, it's inefficient, and for another, it just disrupts things. And I found this part very interesting too. Finally, there is the more responsible, even tortured self-examination, which leads professional people to ask whether they are in their own activities which leads professional people to ask whether they, in their own activities, might not be guilty of brainwashing. Educators about their teaching, psychiatrists about their training and their psychotherapy, theologians about their own reform methods. Opponents of these activities, without any such agonizing scrutiny, can more glibly claim that they are nothing but brainwashing. Others have seen brainwashing in American advertising, in large corporate training programs, in private preparatory schools, and in congressional investigations. These misgivings are not always without basis, and suggest that there is a continuity between our subject and many less extreme activities, but the matter is not clarified by promiscuous use of the term. And this part here, where it says many less extreme activities, is something that I feel is incredibly relevant, because as I was reading through this book, what really got me interested in it was the fact that I very, very quickly began to see parallels between this kind of material that was published again in the 1960s and the kind of social programming that I see going on in modern Western culture today, particularly when it comes to progressive activities, and particularly when it comes to, for example, the LGBTQ movement. When it, for example, all of the isms, like racism, sexism, transphobia, etc. Those three things are, I see very strong facets of the kind of tactics that we're going to discuss in the first two chapters of this book when it comes to those modern applications of those things. For despite the vicissitudes of brainwashing, the process which gave rise to the name is very much a reality. The official Chinese Communist program of Suisang Kaizhou, variously translated as ideological remolding, ideological reform, or as we shall refer to it here, thought reform, has in fact emerged as one of the most powerful efforts at human manipulation ever undertaken. To be sure, such a program is by no means completely new. Imposed dogmas, inquisitions, and mass conversion movements have existed in every country and during every historical epoch, but the Chinese communists have brought to theirs a more organized, comprehensive, and deliberate, a more total character, as well as a unique blend of energetic and ingenious psychological techniques. Whatever its setting, thought reform consists of two basic elements: confession, the exposure and renunciation of past and present evil, and re-education, the remaking of a man in the communist image. These elements are closely related and overlapping, since they both bring into play a series of pressures and appeals, intellectual, emotional, and physical, aimed at social control and individual change. This was a paragraph that struck me very, very strongly, and this was the first time that I thought, damn, this has major applications in modern society, because right up here, this system, confession and re-education, are two things that we see constantly happening on the internet. Whenever somebody online is accused of being a transphobe or a bigot or a racist, one of the things that they are demanded to do is confess. It's not enough for them to say that they're sorry. Notice how I say you never apologize to people when you're accused of this. And I didn't realize until now why you shouldn't apologize. Because as I read further in this book, I realized the psychology behind these efforts at demanding a confession. Because it's not about sorrow. It's this transition from confession to re-education. Because if somebody says they're sorry if they've been accused of something, even if they've confessed that crime and they say they're sorry, but sorrow doesn't necessarily mean repentance. Repentance is the act of making up for the sin that you have committed. And in the modern social sense, that applies too. Because we very often see people say, when other people who have been accused of racism, bigotry, intolerance, etc., when those people apologize, they're very often told your apology is not accepted. Because it's not an apology that people are looking for. They are looking for submission and re-education. They want those people that they have accused to not just stop doing the things that they were accused of doing, but to repent and re-educate themselves so that they then become proponents of the very cause they were accused by. The root cause seems to stem from peer pressure. We will talk about that, trust me. We will very, very much talk about that. We have a drink. Okay, a second. Reparation ideology, yep, that's definitely an element of it too. There's a lot of detail here, and this part where he sets out the context for what he's doing, because this man is a psychologist himself, so he has a background in psychotherapy and in psychological training techniques. And what he does as he says here, in January of 1954, he travels to Hong Kong to interview people who have been subjected to Chinese communist brainwashing techniques. And he's able to interview both Western people and also people that are Chinese natives. I have not gotten to the experiences of the Chinese natives yet, but I found I'm down to about chapter 3 after 2 of his major interviews with 2 rather interesting people. Oh dear, my throat really is bad today. Give me 1 second. Let me have a cough. The whole going back to show redemption seems to be an attempt to buck the resistance against historical reparations. It could also be a consequence of the internet shifting to be more... I'll get back to that in a second, obviously. So this psychologist goes to Hong Kong and he starts to talk to people that have been brainwashed, or that have undergone brainwashing. The impact of these first encounters was not something one readily forgets. An elderly European bishop leaning forward in his hospital bed, so deeply impressed with the power of the prison thought reform program he had just experienced that he could only denounce it as an alliance with the demons. A young Chinese girl, still shaken from the group hatred that had been turned upon her at the university at Peking, yet wondering if she had been selfish in leaving. And this was another very interesting part. Stop messing around. Is that I have already seen, in just the 2 examples that I've read, the 2 interviews, both of the people, although they were tortured for years and years in these camps, both of them came away from the experience feeling as if there was actually a positive element of it in some capacity. There were things they realized when they had left these brainwashing programs, there were aspects of those programs they actually started to miss in their lives. That was one of the hardest things for them to deal with. The fact that they had been affected so deeply, that there was a part of them that had become upset at the notion of going back to regular society, of having to, that despite the fact that they had been so horribly assaulted, it had become natural to them to submit. and they found the freedom of returning to normal society to be an oppression of its own sort, which I found to be extremely interesting as somebody that has never lived in a severely oppressive society. Big Will, let me just read back from that. It could also be a consequence of the internet shifting to be more financially driven in showing appreciation to creators on the internet. One merit is no longer its own reward, that has become materialistic, and so consequences too must be materialistic. I kind of agree. I can see where you're coming from. I think that it's not particularly relevant to this, but it's definitely an option worth keeping in mind. So now we get down. I'm gonna skip over because that's just context. That whole chapter isn't. But this part where he starts to talk about the attitude of the Chinese communists, I found very, very interesting. And up here it starts. As I proceeded with the work, I realized that one of the main causes for confusion about thought reform lay in the complexity of the process itself. Some people considered it a relentless means of undermining the human personality. Others saw it as a profoundly moral, even religious attempt to instill new ethics into the Chinese people. Both of these views were partly correct, and yet each, insofar as it ignored the other, was greatly misleading. For it was the combination of external force or coercion with an appeal to inner enthusiasm through evangelistic exhortation, which gave thought reform its emotional scope and power. Coercion and breakdown are of course more prominent in the prison and military programs, while exhortation and ethical appeal are especially stressed with the rest of the Chinese population, and it becomes extremely difficult to determine just where exhortation ends and coercion begins. And I again find that this is so applicable to how online culture tends to work, where people are, it's the carrot and stick approach, and that this carrot and stick approach was very much perfected in these circumstances of coercion through these brainwashing programs, is that it wasn't that people were mentally destroyed and attacked all the time. No, they were exploited, they were broken down on a social level, and then they were built back up into something that was more resembling the attitudes and opinions of those who were building them back up. As he says down here, Mao himself, in a well-known speech originally delivered to party members in 1942, laid down the basic principles of punishment and cure, which are always quoted by later writers. To overcome undesirable and unorthodox trends, he specified that two principles must be observed. The first is, punish the past to warn the future. And the second, save men by curing their ills. Now remember that point, save men. He's not saying we need to destroy men to have a subservient populace. He is saying we need to save men. Past errors must be exposed with no thought of personal feelings or face. Now how does that sound when you compare it to how the internet goes about revealing people's past errors? We must use a scientific attitude, again, appeal to experts, to analyze and criticize what has been undesirable in the past. This is the meaning of punish the past to warn the future. But our object in exposing errors and criticizing shortcomings is like that of a doctor in curing a disease. The entire purpose is to save the person, not to cure him to death. If a man has appendicitis, a doctor performs an operation and the man is saved. We cannot adopt a brash attitude towards diseases in thought and politics, but must have the attitude of saving men by curing their disease. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is an excellent example of something that I have seen a literal 100% direct translation in multiple Western, non-Chinese, well, not directly Chinese influenced books and ideologies and so on. In prisons, Western civilians encounter a special penal version of these principles. All crimes have definite sociological roots. The evil ideology and evil habits left behind by the old society calling for the injuring of others for self-profit and seeking enjoyment without labor, still remain in the minds of some people to a marked degree. Thus, if we are to wipe all crimes from their root, in addition to inflicting on the criminal the punishment due, we must also carry out various effective measures to transform the evil ideological conceptions in the minds of the people so that they may be educated and reformed into new people. And this idea of the death of the old person and rebirth into a new person runs very strongly through all of these things. And how often have you thought to yourself, have you looked at people on the internet, for example, those who are very, 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 very strongly aligned with the LGBTQ movement? Have you ever thought to yourself, it doesn't seem like you have any personality besides your sexual identity, that you can't start any conversation? Have you heard these people that they're very often featured on places like the BBC as well? The wonderful, wonderful BBC, where they say, oh, this person, my trans identity is part of my everyday life. There's no conversation that I have that is not where I don't mention that I'm trans, because that's who I am. I am trans. Or, I am gay. I am an Apache attack helicopter. It's not the specific. Again, people will probably quote this at some point in my life and go, you are being a transphobe. No. I am using these people as an example of an ideology, okay? You can be gay, you can be trans, you can be rainbow, you can be monogram, you can be an Apache attack helicopter. It's not what you are, it is the ideology that motivates you to express what you are. Because remember, there are plenty of conservative gays. There are like people like Blair White is transsexual, and she is a very strong right-winger. So it's not what people identify as, it's that they allow that identity to subsume every other part of their personality. Because they have gone through this process where they have been encouraged to have the old part of themselves, aka any connection to the old culture, killed, so that they can then have the new personality, which is their new identity. It's what one does that should define a person, not what a person is. Yeah, I agree with you, but that is not something that these people do. One second. A large portion of doubt and uncertainty has been returned to their... Oh, sorry, I'll read up actually, because this is obviously... Yeah. The whole giving back to show redemption seems to be an attempt to buck the resistance against historical reparations. It also be... Oh, I already read that. A large portion of doubt and uncertainty has been returned to their daily action. The programs they went through gave a guideline they wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, sorry, I understand the context now, Big Wheel. Yeah, I agree with you completely. I'm reading numbers right now. The Israelites literally felt that after leaving Egypt, they kept complaining that they felt better under Egyptian oppression. I know exactly what parts of the Bible you're reading as well, Magdalena Rex. I agree, that's another example of it. And if we go back to what this book was saying earlier, about how brainwashing has similarities with other techniques that have been used throughout history, or that it focuses on parts of people's personality that they have expressed previously, that it's an amalgamation of prior events that can be connected together rather than an entirely new thing. I agree with that. It's an extreme version of something that people do by default that has been refined. It's the difference between... Put it this way. Let me just read Big Wheel's comments first. That being said, I find the examples highlighted here a bit tricky because it's a very largely applicable format. Unless I'm misunderstanding, pointing out errors and applying correction is a fundamental aspect of just learning in general, not necessarily brainwashing. Yes. Yes, you are correct. Again, when I was talking about terminology earlier, a lot of people, even when they believe in the idea that brainwashing is bad, they then think that brainwashing applies to things such as learning in general. Because you remember when I read earlier that some educators, psychologists and so on, have wondered, am I brainwashing people when I educate them or I give them psychotherapy? And I think one of the major goals of this book is to clarify what brainwashing actually is, to help equip the reader. This is what I truly appreciate. A very strong feeling that I get from this book is that it is trying to equip the reader to present for themselves a defense against these techniques in future by thoroughly understanding them and also comparing them to existing techniques that people use in the world every day as part of normal social interactions. It's the equivalent, for example, if you had a bruise, if you had a headache or a bruise, what would you take? You'd probably take ibuprofen. That's a painkiller. Okay. Would you take heroin? Would you take fentanyl for a bruise? No, you wouldn't. Why? Because it's an extreme, because fentanyl would be a completely over-the-top and extreme and even dangerous thing to take if you just had a bruise. Maybe if you were dying of very, very late-stage cancer, you could make an argument that a painkiller as strong as heroin or fentanyl would be an acceptable response to that level of pain, but you wouldn't otherwise. And I think you can compare, like, brainwashing is the fentanyl equivalent in this scenario. That brainwashing at its apex is very at the extreme end of a set of behavioral conditioning tools that are part of everyday society and even parental society when parents teach their children. The parents are basically giving their children ibuprofen, whereas brainwashing would be giving them fentanyl. Christianization is a purification of the negative and the transfiguration of the old self to that of holiness and sanctity. You were born anew, but your old self isn't destroyed, unlike communist education. Yeah. Got a bruise? Have you tried changing your gender to cure that? Fentanyl is used in hospice care? Okay, I did not actually know that, but if it's used appropriately, I don't care what's used, just as long as it is, again, it's used appropriately. That's my entire point. Oh goodness, what is going on the Discord again? What the heck? I sometimes glance back at Discord and I'm like, what on earth is going on there? People always get up to the craziest stuff when I'm streaming for some strange reason. Anyway, let's get back to this. This is one of the most important points. I've highlighted red stuff as stuff that I enjoy and that I find is salient points, whereas blue is the incredibly important ones. In all of this, it is most important to realize that what we see as a set of coercive maneuvers, the Chinese communists view as a morally uplifting, harmonizing, and scientifically therapeutic experience. And I've highlighted this in blue because this is something that is so important to understand about the way that ideologies today go about using these techniques. And this is a thread that ran through a lot of the experiences that I've already read in this book, and I'm sure we'll continue to run through them, is that many of the re-educators in these brainwashing camps were genuinely and sincerely trying to help the people that were in these camps. Even though they used things like torture, even though they used things like sleep deprivation, time and again, they would sincerely reiterate that they just wanted to help people. That they were just using an extreme cure for an extreme disease. And this is such an important thing, because you see people who are anti-racists, who are proponents of LGBTQ ideology, who are so obviously sincere. There are plenty of them who are horrible people, just as there are plenty of Christians who are horrible people, just as there are Muslims who are horrible people. But at the same time, the most passionate and the most fervent and the most effective people in these organizations are not the ones who are there because they're sadists or they get a kick out of torturing people. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about war, about conflict, about soldiery. The greatest soldiers are not the remorseless psychopaths. They are the people who have sometimes an overabundance of empathy for their fellow man. Because empathy can be both a good and a bad thing. To have empathy for someone is not inherently good or bad. It's what you use that empathy to do. Because somebody who has high empathy can be a tremendously good manipulator. People who have high empathy can often use that empathy to manipulate other people far more efficiently than those with low empathy. Low empathy is most associated with low functional psychopaths, whereas high empathy is often associated with high functioning psychopaths who are very capable of using that intrinsic ability to analyze people's reactions and emotions to manipulate them more effectively. Let me scroll down a bit further. I'm not sure if and this is borne out again through these Communist Party regulations. In dealing with the criminals, there shall be regularly adopted measures of corrective study sessions, individual interviews, study of assigned documents, and organized discussions to educate them in the admission of guilt and obedience to the law, political and current events, labor production, and culture, so as to expose the nature of the crime committed, thoroughly wipe out criminal thoughts, and establish a new moral code. And the reason I highlight this is that this is Chinese communist prison regulations. So this is from an internal Chinese communist document. I have to wake a chat for a second. In 1984, there was a twisted sense of love in O'Brien's torture of Winston. He did this violent re-education in Room 101 as a form of twisted love of Big Brother and those who love Big Brother. Yes. I think the people at the top know their maneuvers are horrible practices, but just pretend it's okay to teach the useful idiots to genuinely believe it's okay. I've always felt the only reason that I've gotten as bad as it is because this all comes from people's good intent. Yeah, and this is also very important, is that there's a historian, I forget what his name is, which is very irritating, but I'm terrible with names. But this was something that was a trend in the difference between post-Soviet and pre-Soviet historical analysis. Is that before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the preconception of high-level Soviet officials was that these people were monsters and psychopaths and sociopaths who had managed to get themselves into high-level government positions, and they were manipulating and controlling the rest of the population using an ideology that was purely designed by themselves for the purpose of exploiting those beneath them. And then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet archives of classified documents were made available to Western historians. So for the first time, Western historians could travel to Russia and look at the in-depth political communiques of people such as Joseph Stalin and high levels of the Soviet government. And what they found was very, very interesting. Because, as I mentioned, previously they had presupposed that if they were ever to get access to any of these documents, they would find a whole bunch of sociopathic nonsense written by people that were going back and forth saying, yeah, we've got the plebs to believe this stupid nonsense, we don't believe it ourselves, we're living the high life, etc. They were convinced that when they got access to these archives, they would expose the Soviets for the hypocrites that they were. Now, don't get me wrong, people like Lavrenti Beria was a horrifying if you ever want to see, if you want to see a man that you can credibly accuse of being possessed by a demon, Lavrenti Beria is a very good example. That man was a truly horrifying person. The stuff that he did was disgusting. Like, to the point where, like, the death of Stalin, that parody movie, actually underestimates how psychopathic he actually was. So there were definitely monsters and psychopaths in the Soviet government. But instead, what these Western historians found when they analyzed these high-level classified documents and communiques was that very often the Soviet leadership was profoundly sincere in its attempts to remake people into true Marxists and true believers, and very often they expressed a genuine, sincere, emotional disappointment and misery and upset in what they thought they had to do to the people in order to make them into true Marxists. Like, very often, that maybe not even the, maybe, you know, again, there were plenty of psychopaths in the Soviet government. It did not encourage good people to become Soviets, but at the core, the true believers of Soviet Russia were the ones with the power. They weren't useful idiots. They were sincere. They were sincerely trying to turn the population into a Marxist utopia. They weren't just exploiters. And that really shocked Western historians, because Western historians were convinced that nobody could truly believe in this stuff. They were convinced that nobody could be a true believer in Marxism. But the fall of the Soviet Union proved that wasn't the case. They absolutely were sincere. And that's what you have to remember. It's a mistake to think that people in the LGBTQ community, or the anti-racists, or like the true progressive, you can even say like the green movement too, like the hyper-environmentalists, the people who sincerely believe that people should just stop breeding, or that people should kill themselves in order to make the planet better. They're not just trying to get you to kill yourself so that they can have your resources. No, they are true believers. They do really believe what they say. Stalin was a true believer of Marxism. He just thought the orthodox strain of Marxism couldn't work and that he had to be flexible, aka any violent means necessary. He got this from Lenin's flexibility. Yes, I agree. The people over on this side were true believers. I mean, Durante spent years covering up the Holodomor in the New York Times. Yes, again, I'm not saying those people don't exist, but the idea of like the more, when I say the Western historians, I'm talking about mostly those that obviously were not socialists themselves, that were genuine, that basically were capitalists. Like the people from the traditional capitalist mindset were all those historians basically thought there's no way the socialists can be sincere. There's no possibility that they can believe this because, you know, socialism obviously doesn't work. We've run the numbers. We've crunched the numbers. We've done the economic analysis. Socialist economics, planned economics, centralized economics, they don't work. So there can't be an explanation for these people clinging to planned economics, to brainwashing techniques, to all of this, because it doesn't work. It makes their population weaker, not stronger. So we, as capitalists, cannot understand why they would be doing this. So they've got to be exploiting the people. I don't think the global homo leaders are true believers, or at least their beliefs are so blatantly Luciferian that there's no difference between psychopathic power lust and their ideals there. I can agree with that. I can definitely agree with that. Let me have me sippy. And this was the first case. The first chapter is devoted to this man, the re-education of Dr. Vincent. And Dr. Charles Vincent was a doctor. He was a Frenchman, and he worked in China for something like 20 years before he was arrested as a criminal. And these are his comments here. And his first comment here is, from the imperialistic side, we are not criminals. From the people's side, we are criminals. If we look at this from the imperialist side, re-education is a kind of compulsion. But if we look at it from the people's side, it is to die and be born again. And down here, after he's arrested on basically trumped up charges, it says up here, they produced a warrant for his arrest and took him to the detention house or re-education center, where he was to spend the next 3.5 years. After a few preliminaries, he was placed in a small bare cell that already contained 8 other prisoners, all of them Chinese, and again, the blue highlighting is the very important parts. They were a specially selected group, each of them advanced in his own personal reform, each eager to apply himself enthusiastically to the reform of others as a means of gaining merits towards his own release. What's a term that we would use today to describe this exact attitude? We'd call it virtue signaling. This is a more refined version, a more concentrated version of virtue signaling. These people were here to preach to this man because they had already gone through the same things that he had done. and they were looking for ways to demonstrate their commitment to the cause by virtue signaling to him. That are they true believers, but the experiment didn't pay off, so they're just making the most selfish gains of the consequence they developed. Yeah, we call that elitist beliefs. It's an all-encompassing totalitarian worldview. Yes, yep. Each in turn shouted invectives at Vincent, denouncing him as an imperialist and a spy, demanding that he recognize his crimes and confess everything to the government. Vincent protested. He was not a spy, he was a doctor. He had worked as a doctor in China for 20 years. But this only resulted in more vehement accusations. The government has all the proof. They have arrested you, and the government never makes a mistake. You have not been arrested for nothing. Then his cellmates went on to question him further about all the activities in which he engaged as a physician to cover up his spy personality. This procedure in the cell was known as a struggle, conducted for the purpose of helping a prisoner with his confession, and it was an experience which Vincent had to undergo frequently, particularly during the early phases of his imprisonment. And this is a very repeated thing as well, where they say, the government knows all about your crimes. That is why we arrested you. It is now up to you to confess everything to us. And in this way, your case can be quickly solved, and you will soon be released. Now, we don't see too much of this nowadays. What I've noticed very much is that there's a lot more of the stick and a lot less of the carrot. That we've moved a lot from... I didn't know Twitter was invented so long ago. Yeah, exactly. Well, the more you read about this, the more parallels you start seeing between the stuff that happens here and the stuff that happens online right today. One second, I need to adjust my... I'm shifting around a lot in my chair for some reason. I'm not sure why. Probably because I'm just very antsy from full moon. In fact, guys, give me just about 30 seconds. I'm going to have a stretch, and also I'm going to go very quickly to the toilet, so I'll be back in 2 seconds. I am back, chat. Sorry about that. They called him a spy, they denied his doctorate, but he just kept on diagnosing their ills. Is Zeitgeist Redemption a true story? Commies have always been evil. They just had very good PR campaign to make people think they're well-meaning. No, they're evil. I mean, the fact is that they don't think of themselves as evil. No evil person truly thinks of themselves as evil. So I'm not denying that they are evil from my perspective, but from their perspective, they aren't. And that's a very important part to understand about this, because if you just go after another person and you say to them, you are evil, then the other person is never going to change, because they don't think of themselves as evil. What I try and do to everybody, and again, remember, I talk to people that are LGBTQ. We have multiple people in our Discord who are of alternate sexualities. And there's at least, there's Lennox there as well, who is I think she would describe herself as non-binary herself, and I really like her. She's a pretty decent friend of mine. If you automatically consider those that are different to you as evil, then you are never ever going to be able to get them to change their ways. Yeah, so just Pippa's trans sister. Fun fact, Pol Pot called himself Elder Brother. IK 1984 was based on... I know 1984 was based on Stalinism. Between Mao, Pol Pot, and the Kim dynasty, it really seems East Asians read 1984 as a manual even before Global Homo. Yes. Yes, that is most definitely a factor in things. Why am I being pinged at the Discord? I know you're live, but what? I did a PNG of course for reasons. Go get it on her Discord. I'm sorry. A few minor interruptions there. Let's go back to this. Yeah, just refocusing on what I was saying earlier. One of the things that very quickly jumped out at me is this constant affirmation of the government as omniscient, as all-seeing. Because you can see up here at the top, the government has all the proof, they arrested you and the government never makes a mistake, you have not been arrested for nothing. We see also in the modern era how many times governments are viewed as perfect. The government doesn't make mistakes, and the people will go out of their way to make sure to always believe in the government. And governments are constantly taking steps to try and have more omniscient control over people's lives. There's the whole thing of the surveillance state. They read all your emails, they know all your data, everything is online, etc., and so on. And that's the reason. It's because these people don't want to ever be wrong. And they want to be able to pry into your lives at any time and find any reason to arrest you. The Chinese were just honest. Well, they weren't honest about it, but they just didn't care because they were already totalitarian. They could already just pick somebody up and arrest them for whatever they wanted. They didn't have any accountability. Whereas governments, they do still have the tiniest shred of accountability. And that is why they desperately want to control all information, so they can always have a reason to arrest you. Marx was unironically evil considering he didn't even practice and was a lazy, licentious bum what he preached. His favorite quote was Mephistopheles saying he wanted all creation perish. I mean, I can agree with that. I do think there are unambiguously evil people. I just want to make that clear. There are absolutely unambiguously evil people. There are absolutely unambiguously unsalvageable people that will deliberately choose to do evil things just because they are evil. What I'm saying is, what I want to make a distinction between is the people who are absolutely impossible to save, and those people who might still be reached, who you can still have dialogue with, who you can still communicate with on the basis of shared moral identity. And if you could help even one of those people not be drawn in, not be brainwashed in this manner, then I think that's worth a great deal of effort. I don't think people who are different than me are evil, just communists, and it took a long time to accept that communists are just evil people. Actions speak louder than words. From earlier, planned economy worked, but only due to Lend-Lease. It's why the Allies and Soviets invaded Iran during World War II. Look at everything happening in Canada, can't even get the local news on the... What? Muffy Graves, can you elaborate on that a tiny bit? That you can't get the local news on the internet? Can you explain that for me? And also down here with the blue highlighted text again. And this way your case can be quickly solved and you will soon be released. But remember, yeah, he spent 3.5 years in this detention camp. And yet every time he was told, your case will be quickly solved and you will soon be released if you just confess. And the thing was, again, this wasn't a lie. They weren't lying to him here, as you will understand later. This was a completely sincere and honest assessment. If he had just confessed everything, his case would have been quickly solved, and he would have soon been released. Now, logically, you think, how can that be the case? They kept him for 3.5 years, and they refused to listen when he did even try to confess. As we'll see. By 6 a.m., after 10 hours of interrogation, he had produced much information, but he still asserted his innocence, denied that he was a spy or had any subversive relationship with these organizations, and again said that he did not understand why he had been arrested. Again, keep this in mind because it's a very important point. And his commentary here is how it is exactly how serious that it went. They start struggling to help you. The struggle goes on all day to 8 p.m. that night. You're obliged to stand with chains on your ankles and holding your hands behind your back. They don't assist you because you are too reactionary. You eat as a dog does, with your mouth and teeth. You arrange the cup and bowl with your nose and try to absorb a broth twice a day. If you have to make water, they open your trousers and you make water in a little tin in the corner. In the WC, someone opens your trousers and after you are finished, they clean you. You are never out of the chains. Nobody pays any attention to your hygiene. Nobody washes you. In the room, they say you are in chains only because you are a reactionary. They continuously tell you if you confess all, you will be treated better. Ow, ow, ow. Sorry, I've got a really nasty itch. Ow. And this is another very important point. Towards the end of the second day, Vincent was concerned only with finding some relief. That night, when called for interrogation, he made what he called a wild confession, a description of espionage activities that he knew to be non-existent. And as it says here, he invented a whole organization. We see in the judge someone who wants to press something on us, and if we show we are a big criminal, maybe we will get better treatment. Every one of us tries to cheat the government this way. We know they are angry with the Americans, so we will become a member of an American spy ring. And here is the interesting point. When he was pressed for details, he could not substantiate his story and inconsistencies appeared. The confession was rejected, and he was once more summarily dismissed by the judge. The round of interrogation and struggle continued. On the third night, he changed his tactics. Aware that the officials were greatly interested in his activities and contacts, he began to reconstruct and confess every detail of every conversation with friends and associates, which he could remember from the whole of his 20 years in China. He did this because I thought they were trying to prove I gave intelligence to friends. For 8 days and nights, Vincent experienced this program of alternating struggle and interrogation, and was permitted no sleep at all. Moreover, he was constantly told by his cellmates that he was completely responsible for his plight. You want the chains. You want to be shot. Otherwise, you would be more sincere and the chains would not be necessary. He found himself in a Kafka-like maze of vague and yet damning accusations. A Kafka-like maze of vague yet damning accusations. Where would you be able to take this exact sentence and apply it? Would anyone disagree with me when I say this is exactly how social media cancellations go? A Kafka-like maze of vague yet damning accusations. He could neither understand exactly what he was guilty of, aka recognize his crimes, nor could he in any way establish his innocence. Again, how much does that sound like a victim of online cancellation? Cancellations of public throw session. Exactly. Precisely. I should note, unlike Stalin, who intentionally and personally killed millions, Mao's biggest deaths were through famine or indirect lynch mobs. Mao didn't want martyrs against Maoism, he wanted converts. Yes, and I find Mao a fascinating person because I think that... Because Mao was, again, he was an early example of a completely sincere socialist. Mao, at the start of his regime, actually promoted free speech because Mao was completely sincere in the idea that if you allowed open and even debate of the merits of socialism, socialism would win every single time, and that a good socialist would always be able to argue a capitalist into the ground. It was only after he realized how badly that was turning out that he actually went full censorship, because he genuinely believed that he could win the debate. Yeah, please debate. No, not like that. Exactly. It's like the 5 lights from Star Trek. They aren't asking you to confess. They're telling you what to say to them. The trick is you have to mean it. That's a simple way to put it. I think there is actually more complexity to that. I think it's worth. That's why I'm talking about this. I'm not just saying, oh, it's just they're telling you what they want you to say. There's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. Star Trek Cardassians are an amazing look into this sort of thing, even if a bit on the nose. I do agree. The Cardassians are fantastic. Remember also that Gene Roddenberry was a socialist. Gene Roddenberry was very, very strongly left-wing and a very strong socialist. And yet, the latter part of TNG, with the whole Cardassian things, and also Deep Space Nine, it really really shows the problems with that exact kind of system. Ow, sorry. Oh, my neck is very stiff. I'm one of the stiff neck people. Cardassians were... Yes, I know. Stalin was far left but more authoritarian than left-wing. Mao was less authoritarian but so extremely hyper-left it created a unique totalitarianism. Pol Pot was both and he was a walking demon. Yes. Pol Pot is most definitely someone that I do not foresee getting a resurrection. Put it that way. Why am I still getting pinged? It was the Poke Rogue community this time. What the hell are they announcing now? Oh, good grief, that community is just a complete dumpster fire now. Okay, let's go back to this. A confession began to emerge, which was still wild, full of exaggerations, distortions, and falsehoods, but at the same time, closely related to real events and people in Vincent's life. And actually, I think my stuff runs out here, because I didn't have time to really study this all the way. But as it says here, the emphasis, after 3 weeks, the emphasis again shifted. Now he was required to report on others, to make exhaustive lists of all of the people he had known in China, and to write out their addresses, their affiliations, and anything at all which he knew about their activities. And he's in a compliant state now. But still the clamour from the judges, officials, and cellmates was the same as it had been since the moment of imprisonment. Confess all. You must be frank. You must show your faith in the government. Come clean, be sincere, recognize your crimes. And notice how they say here, be sincere and recognize your crimes. Because it's not enough. Again, look at social media today. When somebody is accused of being a racist, a bigot, a transphobe, etc., it's not enough for them to apologize or even confess. They have to struggle session themselves into seeing themselves as inherently wrong and evil, and very often irredeemable. At this point, about 2 months from the date of his arrest, Vincent was considered to be ready for a beginning recognition of his crimes. This required that he learn to look at himself from the people's standpoint, to accept the prevailing communist definition of criminal behavior, including the principle that the people's standpoint makes no distinction between news, information, and intelligence. Let me just highlight that properly. Just as Vincent was beginning to express himself from the people's standpoint, but in a dazed, compliant, and unenthusiastic manner, he was suddenly surprised by the remarkable improvement in his status. The handcuffs and chains were removed, he was permitted to sit comfortably seated when talking to the judge, and he was in turn addressed in friendly tones. And this is where the brainwashing system changes from how it is today. Are they even still a thing? I thought they got dissolved into other representative causes. What do you mean, exactly? In our case was to force confessions out of us because our legal system is so bad that people were terrified To be in jail in the internal limbo of never getting a trial. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, CBM, as in our case. I've seen Antifa marching with Pol Pot signs. Yes, it's very disturbing. I will show faith in Xenu before I show faith in the government. Yeah. But you can see in this next section, for example, he was told the government regretted that he had been given such a difficult time. Yes. That when people start to confess, then they get leniency. But it's a leniency that is offered only in the case where it's a slippery slope. They're extended leniency so that they can in turn confess more things. Not sure what Antifa is yet. Antifa is very definitely fascist. Antifa is very, very definitely fascist. Yapping for 2 hours and 15 minutes now. And notice what happens the moment that he starts to confess. He was offered more friendly guidance in rewriting, not once but many times, his entire confession. He soon found that the guidance was not to be taken lightly, and on 3 occasions when he expressed some measure of resistance saying, "This I didn't do," the chains were reapplied for 2 or 3 days, accompanied by a return to the harsh treatment of previous weeks. Again, we see this all the time on the internet, is that it's possible if people are accused of something, if they're cancelled, and they apologize, what happens next? Either their apology is not accepted, or they are placed on this kind of informal program where they are constantly monitored and every single thing they do is carefully analyzed by the mob, because the mob has now sensed weakness. And what they do is they watch this person to see if he slips up again. And the moment that a person slips up, it doesn't matter how much, it can be by a tiny amount, then the mob will immediately say, "We retract our forgiveness of you," if they ever did forgive. "We think this proves you were never sincere to begin with. You were always, you're just sorry. You're not sorry because you're actually repentant. You're sorry because you were caught. So we are going to attack you again until you truly understand what you did wrong." And that will happen time and time and time again. It's the metaphorical chains being reapplied, which is exactly what happened to Vincent here. You're not allowed to ever push back in any way. A lot of people think they can say they're sorry and then they can negotiate with the mob. They'll say something like, "Okay, I'm very sorry that I said this thing, that I said this word on a podcast, or I did a comedy stand-up that was offensive to this kind of person. I swear to you, I will never be offensive to this kind of person ever again. I did wrong. I accept that. I apologize. I am so sorry I let you down." What will happen is the next time they do something, and it can be completely unrelated to what they were originally accused of, the moment they do something, then they will be told, "No, this proves that you are an evil person, that you're just finding a new way to express that evil within you. So you need to be re-educated." And that's what happens. You can't apologize to the mob, because the mob is not going to forgive you, and it's not going to negotiate with you. Apologies to them are only the first step on the process of re-education, because that it's called right here it shows that Vincent was given leniency when he began to confess. But then the interrogator said, "It's not enough that you confess like this, you have to confess in the exact way we want you to." And if he tries to push back, even if it's to clarify something, then he immediately goes back to stage 1. It's the chains and the harsh treatment all over again. And people are manipulated into thinking that the leniency is forgiveness. And so they mess up again, and they realize, oh no, it's not forgiveness, because forgiveness is not in the mob's vocabulary. All they want, the moment they sense weakness, is to change the person fundamentally and completely from who they were into who the mob wants them to be, aka another voice in the choir that will in turn go on and denounce other people in the same way they were denounced. It's the self-perpetuating revolution. Antifa are communist revolutionaries. The original Antifa started off as a defunct paramilitary wing of the German Communist Party the day after Germany banned paramilitaries. And I'll go back to CBM. Venezuelan student protests. They keep insisting on getting confessions out of us to charge us with terrorism, on terrorism and treason to the country. The trick was to not talk. I agree. Yes, you've got it. Let me scroll down a little bit further. And see what happens to Vincent next. Next, 3 weeks after the beginning of leniency, he began to take part in the cell's organized re-education procedures. This meant active involvement in the group study program, where sessions took up almost the entire waking existence of the prisoners, 10 to 16 hours a day. Led by the cell chief, its procedure was simple enough. One prisoner read material from a communist newspaper, book, or pamphlet, and then each in turn was expected to express his own opinion and to criticize the views of others. Everyone was required to participate actively, and anyone who did not was severely criticized. Each had to learn to express himself from the correct or people's standpoint, applied not only to personal actions, but to political, social, and ethical issues. With each of the prisoners feeling that his freedom or even his life might be at stake, the zeal of the participants was overwhelming. And how much do you see this? You've ever heard of the zeal of the converted? This reminds me a lot of old sci-fi movies. They're collectivists. The point is to destroy any resistance whatsoever to the will of the group. You will love Big Brother. Yes, exactly. I wonder if anyone's just played fully into the perception they have, not fight back with the dire reality, just play along and own the fact they're societally a villain. I don't think it would go very well for them. Again, how long would you be able to resist 24/7 torture? That's just what would happen to you, I'm pretty sure. You'd just be tortured for 24 hours a day, with no let-up. How long are you going to survive that? In Twitter cancellations, I meant all the Chinese execution camps. I think they have. And again, that's actually not even a bad way to go about things. It polarizes you. It makes it a lot harder to reach out to other people, but... I mean, look at Stone Toss, for example. Like Stone Toss. Is that he was cancelled, he was declared a Nazi and a racist, and what did he do? And he was doxxed. Well, people say he was doxxed. He's never actually confirmed the dox, which is the right thing to do. Don't confirm doxes. And what did he do? He made a sale. He made it into a PR event, which was a good thing to do. He did the right thing. Now, Stone Toss is a great example of how to deal with cancel mobs. Own it. Where are we now? Here's another part. Discussions started on an intellectual level. Let me just highlight that as well. Discussions starting at an intellectual level would often quickly become concerned with personal analysis and criticism. When Dr. Vincent was found wanting in his adoption of the people's standpoint, or when his views were considered erroneous, it became necessary for him to examine himself and look into the causes of these reactionary tendencies. He had to search out the harmful bourgeoisie and imperialistic influences from his past for further evaluation and self-criticism. Every question or problem had to be solved according to the facts in order to get to the truth, viewing everything, of course, from the people's standpoint. Now, this is worthy of a blue highlight, because this is something that the moment you open any kind of socialist literature, especially anything that talks about racism, like what about white guilt, for example, the idea of white guilt. White guilt is literally this idea of the bourgeoisie imperialistic influences from these Chinese brainwashing sessions. The thing I find scary is how modern this phenomenon is. Obviously, there were oppressively collectivist societies in the past, but you never read about struggle sessions in the ancient world. It came from a mix of Protestant post-millennialism and the Enlightenment idea of general will. Rousseau was an evil bastard. On that, we can completely agree. Because they weren't totalitarian societies, you were allowed to have differing opinions in private as long as you publicly supported the group, they didn't care. Consequence of the death of God, yes. Well, I mean, as a Christian, I can safely say that God has never died, but I mean, that's a conversation for a different day. A disheartening thing to see is that a lot of the talking points about Kafka-esque oppressions of SJWs seemed to be entering the thought of common thought. I was just thinking about the white guilt thing. Yes. You know, how many times have you heard communists don't just want you to parrot the talking points, they want you to actually believe it? Yes, precisely, Gigadrum16. As I was saying, white guilt is literally just the same exact principle as is being discussed here, except the bourgeoisie and imperialistic influences are white guilt. That's it. There is no difference. When you are asked to be an you're not allowed to say, oh, I don't see race. No. When you say, I don't see race, what you're saying is, I am ignorant to my own guilt. Because the mere fact you are not black or you are not a certain race means you are automatically infected by white culture. You need to have these struggle sessions where you admit to your white guilt, to your inherent bias, to your intrinsic racism. Because these are all qualities that you, as a product of Western imperialist education, of patriarchal education, of whatever the hell the buzzword is, these are things that are intrinsic within you, that are almost like, in fact, there's a lot of similarity as well with the Indian idea of how do you pronounce it? Scheduled castes, I think. For example, the difference between the Brahmins, the Dalits, the Kshatriyas, and so on, is the Dalits in Indian society are regarded as the untouchables, because the idea is if you touch an untouchable, the evil that they have within them will infect your own purity. If a Brahmin and a Dalit interact, then the Brahmin's karma or soul is tainted by his interaction with the Dalit. It does not matter if the Dalit is a good person or not. The Dalit was born an untouchable and can never get rid of that stigma. His karma is tainted. And the same principle is used here. Was Franco even really a fascist? Fascist, not well studied on him, but from what I've seen, he just sound like a dictator. It's like knocking out the load-bearing block out of a Jenga tower. Let me just read back up again. The death of God refers to the concept of God in the public consciousness and everything. I understand what you're talking about now, Maniacal Foreigner, yes. And I completely agree with you. Absolutely. I completely agree with you. The death, I think a better term would be the idea of extrinsic morality as a whole, of being able to say that something beyond the personal has an ability to exert moral influence on the world. And that can be God, but it's even more extreme than that, Proctor. Brahmin weren't even able to look at Dalit without needing to undergo ritual purification. Ugh! Franco tricked fascists but then dumped them. He was just an authoritarian conservative like Salazar or Metaxas, but he's associated with fascism in the Civil War, so he was called one. He wasn't fascist. I mean, I've never looked into Franco, so I can't judge. I'll just let you talk amongst themselves. Give me a second. Oh dear. At the 3-hour mark, I'll end the stream, by the way, because I'm starting to get a little bit tired. And I think, let me just have a quick look down and see. There's still quite a lot of this. Yes, there is a lot. I didn't realize how much I read. Good grief. Good grief, I read a lot. I would definitely like to go through more of this in future, because it is fascinating to me. Yeah, here we are. We're back to where it was. Dr. Vincent was still receiving more personal attention than anyone else in the cell. At first, he simply gave lip service to what he knew to be the correct point of view, but over a period of weeks and months, he began to accept these judgments inwardly and then apply them to himself. Sorry, I meant it. That's the wrong way around. That should be... In the cell, you work in order to recognize your crimes. They make you understand your crimes are very heavy. You did harm to the Chinese people. You are really a spy, and all the punishment you received was your own fault. It was your own white guilt. You hurt black people just by existing. You have to accept that. It's your own bigotry and your own homophobia that make gay people kill themselves more often than straight people. In the cell, 12 hours a day, you talk and talk, you have to take part. You must discuss yourself, criticize, inspect yourself, denounce your thought. Little by little, you start to admit something, and look at yourself, only using the people's judgment. That's definitely worth a blue highlight right there. Always the emphasis would shift back to the individual emotional experience. Emotional experience, social and emotional learning, but that's a whole topic for a different day. To the thought problems which prevented prisoners from making progress. Dr. Vincent learned to express spontaneously all of his reactions and attitudes during the discussions, and especially to bring out his wrong thoughts, and as he did so, he became ever more enmeshed in the special problem-solving techniques of this ideological world. Now we click back at chat for a second. I did all that, I'm more based than I thought. You can call it the form of good, the good, if you want to get all platonic in your in all terminology, functioning the same idea. Yeah, I would actually say completely that that God. Again, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe that God is the moral center of the universe. But when I talk about the fact that there's the small fact that a vast number of people out in the world are not Christians, so I would generally, when talking about the more encompassed version of the concept as it applies to general society, that idea of a moral extrinsic that can take the form of God when it comes to a Christian, but to the average person would kind of, again, it's the whole terminology thing. It's the implication of something different that I want to avoid. You have to get rid of and denounce all your imperialist thoughts, and you must criticize all of your own thoughts, guided by the official. If not, they will have someone else solve your problem and criticize you more profoundly. You have a problem, you have to denounce it. A schoolmate has to help you. His help has to have the proper standpoint. I am quiet, they say. You have a problem. You are insufficiently passionate. Again, virtue signaling. He was insufficiently virtue signaling. I say, I wonder why the Chinese didn't confiscate all of the capitalist properties like the Soviets. I think it might have been better to do it like the Russians. This is my problem. They have schoolmates to solve my problem, to demonstrate I am on the wrong side because the Chinese communists have to proceed in a better way. Their way is to reform rather than compulsion. Again, reform, not compulsion. He demonstrates that the Soviet Revolution was different from the Chinese Revolution. That the Chinese capitalists suffered through the imperialists because we imperialists never gave them the opportunity to develop their industry. Now the Chinese capitalists have to be useful to the Chinese government and undergo reform. If they follow the government, they will have a bright future. They have to explain the facts until I am convinced. If I am not convinced, I must say I don't understand and they bring new facts. If I am still not satisfied, I have the right to call an inspector, but I wouldn't. I would just accept, otherwise there might be a struggle. You are all day under the compulsion of denouncing your thoughts and solving your problems. You understand the truth of the people, day by day, moment by moment, and you cannot escape, because from your external manifestation, they say they can understand your internal situation. If you continually denounce your thoughts, you can be happy denouncing yourself. You are not resisting. But they keep a record. And after 1 week, if you are not saying anything, they tell you you are resisting your re-education. If you think out 5 or 6 problems, it is a good manifestation. You are progressing because you like to discuss your imperialist thoughts. This is necessary because if you don't get rid of these thoughts, you can't put in new ones. And this, I thought, was an incredibly good section. Because this is why I bang on so much about the sad reality that you can't be neutral on the internet, or at least you can't be ignorant on the law on the internet. You can't ignore the political infiltration that takes place on the internet, because these people are doing it in a very organized and methodical fashion. You can't just sit in a community and go, I'm just here to game, guys. I don't want to discuss politics. I don't want to think about anything but my escapism. Now, sadly, in most communities, you can't do that anymore, even if you want to. Because this is the aim of all of these organizations and all of these movements, to destroy escapism, to prevent you from having anywhere to go where you can escape from their propaganda. And unfortunately, that means that you have to be in at least some way proactive in defending the spaces where you can still go and you can still engage in a level of escapism. A lot of people think, oh, because I have to defend myself, it's no longer escapism. No, I would disagree. I think that by defending yourself and defending your escapist position, your methods of escapism, then you actually form stronger bonds with your fellow man. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Exactly. Exactly. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be overt. Yep, look at the whole Assassin's Creed thing. Exactly, yes. Like, it doesn't... What again, the whole terminology thing really gets to me. That I have tried to explain this on the forum several times. And I've told people, look, it's not about... I'm not saying you have to discuss politics. You don't have to have a politics channel. You don't have to say, yes, I am right-wing. I will fight back against the left-wing oppression. You don't have to say that. You don't have to be political. What you have to do is, at the very least, be willing and agree that you will stand up when these people come for your escapism, which they will do. No matter what, they will attack your escapist fantasies at some point. It is just a matter of time. You have to be prepared for the day that happens. Otherwise, all that will happen is that they will win automatically, and you will be left without a hobby to enjoy. And I have seen so many people on the forum, on Discord, on various other places, they go, I can't be bothered. I just want to be escapist in this community while I can, and then later on when they come, I'm just going to go to another. I'm just going to go to another one. How can I protect hololive culture? It already seems under siege, but I don't know how. I think that mostly, literally all you can do in terms of things like hololive is, again, support the talents that you want to see supported. And that's actually a good question. I think that hololive is honestly too big for... You would have to be more direct than just passive in that case. Cough, Nietzsche's Last Man. Cough. I actually need to look into Nietzsche's Last Man. I need to look into more Nietzsche. Assassin's Creed to me represents the abject failure of DEI as opposed to a hobby being infiltrated. I would say that Assassin's Creed is the nadir of hobby infiltration. I do think, honestly, that mainstream gaming is doomed. I think that it needs to collapse. It needs to collapse, and better game devs need to step up and just keep making better games. And I think it's already falling out. Why is escapism important? Perhaps a dumb question. I know it is important, but I can't find the words. Escapism is important because it allows you to be who you are in a space where you are able to explore parts of yourself without it being connected to the broader social culture. If you are always in a society that judges you for everything you do, then you cannot express yourself freely because you are constantly thinking, what is society going to judge me for? For example, it's also the idea, it goes back to the privacy thing, that privacy is a form of escapism too. That when you're in private, when you're alone, you can be a person that you are not in public. You can be free with yourself. You can do things that are very embarrassing in private that still have meaning for you, that are ways of dealing with problems that you have, that are ways of expressing yourself that you don't want other people to see. And you should have the right to do those things in private. And that is a form of escapism, because you are able to express yourself in ways you cannot in public. And not all things that are done in private that you can't do in public are bad things. And with escapism is basically the freedom to indulge in something without it having ideological consequences. When everything is a hammer, you can't help but feel like a nail. I think it helps someone like Kayla, seems to be a very introverted woman with what sounds like a fairly traditional parents in a very conservative country. No red flags, I feel fine. Yes, and I agree. And I think actually a way to support people like that is just to, and it's very unlikely because they are such big talents. It's not going to be easy to get to be one-on-one with them. And I don't encourage like forcing yourself to be one-on-one with them. But what I try and do very often with, say, indie VTubers who are willing to talk to me is that I say to them, look, I support you for what you are, not what other people want you to be. You don't need to change to appeal to an audience that won't watch you anyway. I try and give people understanding and sympathy so that they don't feel that psychological compulsion to act in a certain way. And let's be honest. Let's be perfectly honest. I want people to act in a certain way. If I had the ability and the power and that, not the power, because that would be coercion, but if I had the ability to just see what I could say to somebody that would be perfectly able to get them to do certain things that I thought were better for them, I could honestly say I would use that talent. I would use that ability. I would look for chances to say to people that I know do stupid things, to say to them the exact words necessary to get them to stop doing those things, and I would consider that a good deed. Because if those words were the things that motivated them, not coerced them, but motivated them and gave them the strength to overcome, say, bad habits or personality flaws, I wouldn't say that would be a bad thing. If you had that ability to just know when a person absolutely needed to hear certain things in order to change, I think that would be a great superpower to have. That would be a great superpower to have, to just know when people truly needed help and when they would be best able to benefit from it, so that you're not speaking to the air. Because nothing feels worse than providing support to somebody and realizing later on, oh, that was a bad time to try and give them support. They didn't need the kind of help that I gave them right then. They needed something different. Basically, I would like perfect foresight, pretty much. And to be honest, I'm actually starting to feel really tired. So with that paragraph, I'm going to stop reading right here, because I think this encapsulates the most important elements of this particular chapter of the book. I want to go through other chapters as well, especially as I read them, because this is a fascinating book. It really is. It covered many topics already. And just to really reiterate the main points that we've gone over so far is that, first of all, what I would like people to take away from this, I think that most people obviously here, maybe people who watching the VOD will get a better impression of this than the people I do feel a bit as if I'm preaching to the choir here, but to sum things up, it is a great mistake to look at the devout and impassioned people of various movements that you don't agree with and think that these people are not sincere. The strongest proponents of any organization will almost certainly be sincere. And it is wrong, if you want to engage with these people, to do so from a position of aggression and accusing them of insincerity. What I would encourage people instead is to be as open and understanding towards individuals as possible. Too much of an echo chamber, he hates us. I embrace diversity of thought. I really do. Because I don't want to be dogmatic. I have always been taught during my life that diversity of thought is an advantage, not a disadvantage. So long as that diversity does not become forced. And I agree. I have gained a much greater appreciation of my own faith by looking at other faiths, including secular faiths, because I feel as if now I have perspective on what draws me really close to my faith, as opposed to just thinking, oh, my faith is the right one, so therefore everything I do with it is justified. No, now I have context and perspective. As I was saying, yes. Like, don't discount people's sincerity. You have to engage with people on the same level. You have to be honest, and you have to be sincere. And you have to be committed. Goodbye, Proctor. One more question before it's over. Do you like VNs, and would you be willing to stream those? I think it's too time-consuming, but maybe. I mean, I wouldn't mind visual novels. I've honestly never played visual novels. Maybe they'd be good. One with decent choices. A choice-driven visual novel, if such a thing exists, would be good. I'd enjoy that. I'm not sure if people would even watch me if I streamed visual novels. I wouldn't mind. I would like one with voice acting, because I don't like... although obviously I enjoy yapping, it would be very hard for me to stream a visual novel for a long period of time. I recommend Katawa Shoujo. I've seen some of that. Your VNs dealing with some serious psychological/philosophical themes could be interesting. I wouldn't mind if Maniacal Foreign, if you could give me recommendations for any of those, I'd be more than happy to listen. Like, feel free to shoot me a DM on Discord or the forum or wherever. I'll be more than happy. Give me just 1 second. I'm trying to open this. Good grief, this is tough. Come on. Nope, I cannot open that jar. Okay. That jar's lid is completely stuck. Choice-driven is kind of an empty request. The better question is what do you anticipate from those choices? I suppose. Most I can think of are not YouTube-friendly, unfortunately. That's the tragedy. Again, I'm not monetized on YouTube, so I don't care if I show sussy stuff. The only thing that I'd be worried about is if stuff was like so bad it would be taken down. I don't like streaming stuff with massive amounts of gore or profanity either. I don't swear, as I try not to swear. So there's that. And I hope that people enjoyed my analysis of that. Just that first part of that book, which I genuinely think is incredibly good. It is incredibly good. I very strongly recommend that people read that book for themselves because it's fascinating. And I hope people can agree with me that there are many parallels with what we discussed already and how modern society tends to work, especially modern internet society, and how people are cancelled, how people are given struggle sessions, and how people are... that cycle of kill the old personality and rebuild people with a new personality. It's not enough that they admit their wrongdoing. They have to change themselves on a fundamental level to conform to the expectations of those who are accusing them. And if they don't do that, it doesn't matter if they apologize. They can apologize, and then 10 years later, those same accusations will be leveled against them, and they will be attacked on exactly the same platform. Because apologies, sorrow, repentance is not enough. Conversion is all that matters. Most choice-driven VNs are, do you want to bang the girl with glasses or the girl with boobs? I'll DM you the link to the Katawa website later. Games are free. I think Sawa Grape Sama was streaming that. And I like Sawa. She follows me on Twitter. So Sawa is very based. A very, 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 very based woman. Sorry, I was looking at something on Discord for a second. Rimabel Express have some interesting VNs. Levity on Itch. I'm definitely going to forget all the suggestions that people make unless they send me DMs directly or they contact me in private. Lisa. Good grief. Oh, dear. Sorry, I'm just looking at the Discord again. I get so many pings while I'm streaming. It's very irritating. Yes, overall, I am going to stop things here, and then I am going to go away and I'm going to read a lot more of this book. You and Me and Her is a nice deconstruction of your stereotypical romance VN. I like deconstructions, but at the same time, I haven't even watched any VN. I haven't really watched any VNs to begin with, so deconstructions only really work when I understand what they're deconstructing. I might play Disco Elysium at some point. I've heard good things about Disco Elysium. Conversion is all that matters, huh? You just summed up another reason why I initially had a similar reaction to the new Puritans and the old Puritans. Thanks, Proctor. You're more than welcome. Hello, Saojun. I don't think I've ever seen you on my stream before. It's Andrew Doyle's book. Andrew Doyle has a book called The New Puritans, How the Religion of Social Justice Captured the Western World. He has an audiobook version, which definitely is not available on Yandex. Do not Google Andrew Doyle's The New Puritans on Yandex. You will definitely not get any results, either from the audiobook version or the PDF version. Definitely don't do that. It won't be lost on you. It's a fairly simple concept. Okay, that's fine. But I found that was also a pretty good book, and it's fairly lightweight too. It's not too long. It's not too long in total. Does it actually give me a total of how long it is in an audiobook format? No, not really. Slightly annoying. Yeah, that's like I think the audiobook version is like 7 or 8 hours, so it's not too long. Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray is also interesting. I don't really... Which one is Douglas Murray? Give me a second, please. Let me just look him up. Because I'm so terrible with names. Douglas Murray, yeah. I don't really like Douglas Murray. I really don't like him. And I can't really describe why in a YouTube-friendly way. I find that he is very, very... I don't know. I'm not going to talk about why I don't like Douglas Murray, because there's no way that I can comment too much without coming across as of controlled opposition. Yeah, I agree. I do agree. He's a negative person. Douglas Murray, actually, I think a good way to describe this is that Douglas Murray is very obviously a high-level intellectual who just happens to be on the right side of history. And when I say right side of history, I mean the right-wing side of history. If he could be a left-wing person, and I think that his mental attitude and outlook would be pretty much exactly the same, just with different viewpoints. You could take every single one of Douglas Murray's arguments and transcribe them to a left-wing perspective, and all you would need to do is change the names of the people that he's condemning, and it would be the exact same arguments. And I think if the wind was blowing differently, Douglas Murray would 100% be a leftist. I don't feel any kind of moral sincerity from Douglas Murray in any capacity at all. I think he is an opportunist. I think he has very intelligent things to say sometimes. But I do not like him as a person. I really, really don't like him. That's all I can think of when you say YT unfriendly. Well, I'd put it this way. I say enough that it would be considered negative towards people of alternate sexualities already. So he has got an issue with infrastructure more than alignment. He just doesn't recognize the root cause. You could say that. I have come to the conclusion the Enlightenment was too shackled to Hermetic and Gnostic thought, even from the get-go. I'm disheartened seeing even Francis Bacon was into Roycerian Hermeticism. Yeah, I know. Well, what's that saying? The devil can disguise himself as an angel of light. The devil has an awful lot of costumes, as is what I will say. But anyway, lads, we are now just a few minutes away. Actually, has it already hit the 3-hour mark? I'm not entirely sure. Allow me to look at my YouTube thingamajiggy. Yeah, 53 minutes. But I am going to say goodnight to you all now. We will get into a discussion on egos and esotericism one day. We're getting a bit of a one-sided view of it here. Yeah, again, I'm perfectly fine with diversity of thought and expression, just as long as people have good arguments. Just have a good argument, please. Anyway, good night. Yes, I will go and have something to eat now because I have got the moonlight munchies. Definitely. I really dislike this. I have been starving all day. I have been desperate for food all day. I've had a full roast. I had a full roast dinner. I had a foot-long sandwich in the morning, and I've had quite a bit of chocolate too. I've completely ruined my diet because for some reason this full moon I have just been starving. I have been so hungry all the time, and I really feel hungry again already. It's really irritating how I just can't get the thought of food out of my head. But anyway, thank you very much for coming. I've really enjoyed this stream. I was very worried about not getting any engagement or anything, but it seems like people did enjoy me talking about this stuff and good comments on it as well. So I really thank you. I'm very grateful for that. So I'll see you all later, and I will say good night for now. So good night, and thank you all for coming. I really do appreciate it. Good night.